today. In the first Trump administration, it was easy to think as a member of the European elite that this was a one-time exception, that something had gone wrong in Western politics. This was a populist uprising. So what do we need to understand, first of all? That in the United States, there is a very, very deep structural transformation going on. I happen to be living, I see Patrick Deneen is out here in the audience and was giving a speech earlier. I was living in the same town as him, South Bend, Indiana, in 2016. That town is dominated by a university, a very great university. I was a part of it at the time, and by a hospital system. It used to be an industrial powerhouse. It had ceased to be that at some point in the 1960s. The streets, even in 2016, were awash with fentanyl. So if you were a young person growing up in that community, not a member of the elite circles, you were experiencing something that many people in the American Midwest, in the American heartland, were experiencing. What were they experiencing? The results of a catastrophic set of bad decisions that had been played out by liberal elites from the 1990s onward. So it's not just a populist discontent that's fanned by provocative salesman politicians. They structurally suffered at a very deep level and were living in many ways, for many people, a hopeless environment. Their industry had been taken away because the doctrines of global economic liberalism said in the 1990s and early 2000s, it doesn't matter where things are made. Well, now, particularly since the COVID pandemic, particularly since the Russia-Ukraine war, it's clear it matters where things are made. Western supply chains are dependent upon foreign competitor powers for lots of critical components. And so one thing that the Trump administration and the movement behind it is doing this time is prioritizing that. That's a structural change that's going to continue no matter what happens next. So people felt the interior of the country had been torn apart. The young men had been sent to die in forever wars whose geopolitical significance or strategic significance for the United States was unclear. So it's time for retrenchment. What are the American national priorities? Well, we lost our industry, we had a terrible foreign policy, and we let the borders go open, and then pushed social progressivism and progressive liberalism in the social sphere to the absolute maximum. Well, that would maybe be fine in the unipolar global moment where, yeah, America can make a few mistakes, it'll still remain on top. That's not the global situation anymore. We can't afford those kind of catastrophic mistakes. We can't afford more 4- and 8-year periods of complete experimentation in the social progressive sphere and collapse in industry and disastrous mistakes in foreign policy. This is a broadly shared sentiment across the American public, and it's not going away. So the sooner that we can understand that is a serious transformation, the better we can understand what's going on in the U.S. This is not ever going back to business as usual, but instead what we can recognize is that some serious mistakes were made in policy over a long period of time on both sides of the Atlantic, and so the new U.S. administration is trying to address those. And for its partners in Europe, it would be better if we also recognized that mistakes have been made, maybe a different set of mistakes nonetheless, and opened the door to figuring out how to change them. So how would we do that? Well, second point, the word values in European elite circles applies only to liberal values. You either accept liberal values or you lack values or reject them. So there has to be some kind of opening to a consideration that maybe, just maybe, I know, really crazy thought, maybe some conservative values could help European nations. That's really where we are. So we're very far in the elite discourse from a full embrace of a national conservative, still less a post-liberal political agenda. But for the European political elites are playing a very defensive game. They're trying to exclude the conservative voices. That's what happened here just before the European elections a year and a half ago, something like that. So that's what they're trying to do. It's a defensive game. The defensive games don't work out over the long run. Third point, This was alluded to by Vice President Vance at his speech at the Munich Security Conference. I found it very inspiring. This is just a personal impression of it, but he pointed out that the word security is used at these forums constantly, but no one ever stops to talk about what it means. Of course, we don't have to have a philosophical discussion of it every time. We know that when there's an adversary country that has nuclear weapons pointed at you, that it's a threat. We know that that's what concerns security. But again, liberal values are the only values. Well, what contribution can conservative values make to security? Doesn't security have a deeper meaning too? Don't we have to ask the question, I believe this is how the Vice President phrased it, what is the thing that we're securing? Well, if we're not allowed to answer that question, it just becomes a rote repetition. So what about considering that families are a core of security? Does continual social progressivism really encourage the behavior patterns, the family formation patterns that will make secure nations in a competitive global environment? This brings me to my fourth point, which is that outside of the European Union, almost every other country in the world recognizes this. Whether they have democratic regimes or non-democratic regimes, there are many different variations of this. But outside of the European Union, of course, people have respected and appreciated parts of the rules-based international order. It did some good things in its time. People realize now, though, that just paying lip service to the liberal international order is not going to make a super strong state out of a small or medium-sized one. You have to calculate on your strengths. There's no time to waste. There's a big global competition, and more countries, small states, medium-sized states, and especially the big ones, recognize that just paying lip service to the ideology which justified a moribund, at best, international order is not going to strengthen their position in the international sphere. So what can be done? I think the colleagues on the stage have already pointed it out. The Trump administration has been highlighting the importance of recognizing that mass migration and free speech are big problems in Europe. Again, it seems to me that many European elites hear this and say, the Trump administration doesn't like us. Americans don't like us. Well, actually, Americans made many of the same mistakes as well, but they managed to come to their senses, at least through this election cycle, in part because freedom of speech actually allowed a different political opinion to break through. Of course, everyone tried to shut down President Trump many different times, but in European press environments and media environments, there's still a long way to go. People are still calculating in the liberal elite on the firewall. We can just keep out the dissenting voices because, after all, they don't express any real concerns. They're just populist challenger parties, and everything will be fine. Everything will not be fine. There are some basic steps that can be taken. Restoring freedom of speech and getting a handle on borders are two relatively simple, should actually be non-controversial first steps, but this is the direction that I think things need to go, and doing so sooner rather than later will make for a healthier transatlantic relationship, no matter how the burdens shift and the understandings change. So thank you so much.
Brilliant. Gladyn, thanks for that. That's a really enlightening view on how things are being thought through from inside America, as it were. I want to remind you, just before our next speaker takes to the stage, after he speaks, we will have some more questions and comments from the audience. For those of you who weren't with us the whole day, we have microphones at the front and one at the back. If you wish to speak, please make your way to the microphone and we'll have plenty of time to get you all in. But before that, our next speaker is someone who is editing my favorite magazines and news sources, has taught me so much, and I'm really delighted that he's with us. But more than that, or equally to that, he's someone who I think combines really rare talent and always makes me think, because he's equally capable of speaking the language of John Milton as John Bull, and equally at home talking the language of the ivory towers as the ordinary people in the pub, and someone who I always learn from whenever he speaks, and I read religiously whatever he has to publish. So could we please welcome the editor of the European Conservative, Mick Hume.
Thank you very much, Jacob. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm delighted to be here. Not always delighted to be in Brussels, but very delighted to be here this afternoon. One of the things I've been doing recently is working for Nigel Farage with Reform UK back home in Britain. And we have come across this interface between European globalism and American Trumpism in a very direct way through the BBC scandal, which I hope you're aware of, which is that the BBC, not only Britain's public broadcaster, basically state-financed, publicly financed voice of reason and truth in our society, but also the kind of voice of globalist liberalism, was exposed as having basically butchered President Trump's speeches on January the 6th to give the mistaken impression that he had incited violence amongst his supporters. Quite extraordinary act for someone to have done, for the BBC to have done to the American president. It's like, you know, the organisation that continually lectures the world about, and particularly conservatives, about the dangers of disinformation, has itself been exposed as the major proponent, the major kind of executor of disinformation in modern political life. I mean, you think, what next? Next, they'll be telling us that the European Union, which goes on about the rule of law all the time, is actually a bit of a corrupt organisation. Who can you trust anymore? So in the middle of the BBC crisis, Nigel Farage went to Florida and saw President Trump, who was really furious about this. And Donald Trump said to Nigel, "Is this how you treat your closest ally?" To which the answer from most of European liberalism, I think, would be yes. That is how we treat you. We have total contempt for you, and you're the millions of Americans who elected you, but we still expect you to defend us, and we still expect you to bail out Ukraine on our behalf, and we'll take the credit. That's the kind of moment we're in terms of the European-American relations. And where that has got Europe, I think, has really been exposed by the Ukrainian conflict. There are many uncertainties, obviously, remaining about how that terrible war will eventually end. But one thing I think we can all be clear about already is that Europe has lost the war, the political war over Ukraine, or at least what I call big Europe, which is the leaders of the European Union and their allies in the UK have lost. They have postured throughout that conflict as being, this is the most important thing for us, our future depends on it, we stand by Ukraine, etc., etc. All talk and no action, and when it comes down to it at the end, the Trump administration has more or less been able to ignore the Europeans in their attempts to negotiate a deal with Russia and Ukraine. The kind of hot air and posturing of a Macron or a Starmer just looks ridiculous. The coalition of the unwilling to do anything whilst talking very big. And I don't know if you saw that moment when the unelected president of Europe, von der Leyen, was out in South Africa talking about the centrality of the EU to any deal in Ukraine. She couldn't have been further away from the centre in South Africa, lecturing the world about the centrality of the EU to any deal, and sounding, as one of the European news outlets said, more like she was putting out a hostage video than making a serious kind of diplomatic intervention. So I think they've been exposed very brutally by that. And however it ends, it will not be the way the EU want it to be. And that's not just about Ukraine. That's a kind of nutshell summation of the problems of the Western alliance. I think the special relationship between America and Europe perhaps always looked better on paper than it did in reality. And anti-Americanism was always a very strong thing in Europe, not only on the left, but amongst establishment figures, and certainly in Britain, who really objected to America taking over the world, or to the French, who really objected to the Americans as a bunch of, very vulgar kind of ingrates. That was always there. But at least they had a very solid shared interest during the Cold War, confronted with the Soviet Union. that convergence of interests really has been not ended, but certainly badly damaged since the end of the Cold War, and tensions have arisen. And that has accelerated in the Trump era, where President Trump has really broken the globalised dreams of the European elite with his America First national interest politics. And the world can see that Europe's mask has slipped. It's been exposed. Its pretensions of being a global player look like the kind of fantasies of an ageing pretender, and the posturing can no longer be carried off. So the future, I think, for Europe really depends on whether it is prepared to get its act together, to stop trying to live in the past, to face up to the new realities, and to prepare to defend itself. And I think this really brings us back to the point that Glennon was just talking about. I too was very struck, excuse me one second. I too was very struck and impressed by Vice President Vance's speech at the security conference in Munich earlier this year. He made some points which were absolutely, you could see them traumatised the Europe's leaders sitting there while he was talking. He talked about the fact that, never mind the external enemy of Russia, what about Europe's enemies within? What about those in positions of power in Europe who had failed to defend European values and fundamental principles for decades? And he said, you talk about defence at this conference, but what are we defending? This is a question that every European leader has got to ask themselves very directly now. What is it? We talk about we're going to increase the defence budget by 5%, 10%, make up a number. What is it that you're supposed to be defending in those things? Because we are led by people who have spent decades rubbishing the very things which they now expect people to defend. They have traduced and rubbished Western-style national sovereignty and borders, democracy, free speech, Western culture, and Western history. All of these things, the fundamental foundations of Western civilization, have been rubbished by those who have run it as something to be embarrassed about, something that is a cause of self-loathing, as we've heard already talked about, and I think in a very kind of instructive way. So what is it that we are defending? This is what we have to agree on. You know, it's all very well for the French or other countries to talk about we're going to introduce forms of national service. For what? How do you expect to recruit young people to defend what? And those who talk about, well, this proves the need for a European army, because more Europe is always the solution to everything, as we know. This proves the need for a European army, are even more deluded. Can you imagine a generation of young Europeans signing up and preparing, I'm going to fight to the death for Queen Ursula von der Leyen and her Brussels bureaucrats? It's an absolutely deluded sense. So if we want to defend ourselves as European nations, we need to go back to ask ourselves what it is we're defending. We need a new Europe of sovereign nations, one which I think is coming, that national conservative movements across Europe are on the march. And we are faced with the possibility, at least, of another spring of nations in Europe, such as we haven't seen since 1848. And that doesn't mean because we have a return to nationhood as being the central focus of American foreign policy and European policy, doesn't mean inevitably conflict. We can build real relations, based, as we see with the success of Prime Minister Orban's trip to Washington, based on an acceptance of shared values. You know, that we may see the end of the West as we've known it, as a military alliance. Maybe we can see the rebirth of the West as an idea that people are prepared to defend together, of free speech, of democracy, of national sovereignty, the things that made Western civilization the greatest in the world and something worth defending. A chance to build a unity of the West of peoples rather than merely of elites, because the people of Europe, the peoples of Europe and the people of America have very much in common, and we have far too much to lose to let the idea of the West die. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Mick. As I mentioned earlier, I'm really interested to get the views of our audience here on these questions. So if you'd like to speak, please make your way to either of these two microphones at the front or the one at the back if you do want to chip in. I think while you remember how to get to your feet, which I'm sure you'll all be doing in a second, I just kind of wanted to put slightly not entirely devil's advocate position, because this sometimes keeps me up at night, but a concern that I've definitely shared with Gladden in the past when we've been talking about these issues, but I wanted to hear everyone's thoughts on it, which is that one reading of lots of the presentations and the speeches is that if only we just rediscover a little bit about what makes Europeans strong, then we don't have a problem to worry about with regards to America, because they ultimately just want to see us stand on our own 2 feet and everyone to be kind of friends and happy again. And yet I'm always reminded of two things that were floating around in the discussion in the run-up to the Americans eventually getting European countries to sign up for more defense spending, for the 5% on defense spending. And one of them was that there was 2 stories I read in the same week, which was one American politician saying or a figure saying it's really, really important they start spending more money, and then another reacting to an announcement by Germany or France that they were going to spend a load of money on a homegrown weapons system, and saying, oh, it's a bit difficult this. You really got to be spending more money on American weapons. And the other was the comments I think even were made in some description by J.D. Vance at some point, which was to the effect that the message for Europe was America's now got to go and get serious about China, and you Europeans now have to pick up the tab for the war with Russia. What wasn't mentioned was that for lots of Europeans, they consider the war with Russia as something that was instigated by America, not necessarily by European countries. So I'd like to just get some perspective. Is it the case that just rediscovering some of what makes Europe great is enough to solve what might be the increasingly different strategic and national interests of Europe and America if they're really diverging? Pedro, can I start with you?
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much for your question. It's a very interesting one, but I think that what we should do in the first place is to put our youth believing in something, and that always starts with education. So we have to educate the youngsters to believe in something, to believe in their flag, not in the flag of the European Union, but in the flag of their own country. If you want them to believe that it's worth to fight for something, to fight for its own people, for its family, and for its country. And then after that, of course, I think, and we do think in Portugal that we have to re-industrialize Europe. We cannot stay dependent on the military weapons or the military defense industry that America has developed in the past years, and that Europe has forgot what to do with it in big ways. So, and in Portugal, that is it's an issue that it's being debated. It's in the news and in news channels, and even in public space. And even now that we are having campaign elections for presidential in January, we are going to have presidential elections in January in Portugal, and the defense problem is a problem that is very present in the debates of the presidential candidates. And of course, we cannot say to the young people, to a 17 or 16 or 18-year-old, you must enlist and go to fight for Ukraine in the borders with Russia. That it's not, even if you pay them a lot of money, that wouldn't be attractive. So I think that we should start with education for patriotism, for sovereignty, and then after that, reindustrialize Europe, each country reindustrialize our own countries to get to that objective, to have strong nations all over Europe. So then we have a block, a continental block of sovereign and strong nations, and that is only the way that we are going to be seen as a equal player by the United States. I think that's the key.
Great, thank you, Pedro. Werner, your thoughts on this question, or things you'd like to pick up from the other speakers?
Well, if you want to make Europe great again, simply cultivating pride of European history will not be sufficient. In particular, how will you convince somebody of being proud of this particular continent if in the schools they only learn about the crimes of colonialism and so on and so forth? So the key issue, first of all, is education. The key issue is not only primary and secondary education, but the university system. In Europe, we see ever more young students going into the humanities, which I really like. I'm myself somebody who has taught humanities for decades. But we need people who are studying technology, mathematics, economics, because unless we make Europe, again, a heartland of industrialization, of commerce, which Europe is not right now, all the rest will not work. And if the United States wants to leave Europe alone with the Ukraine question, well, it's understandable, even though short-sighted in a certain sense. The Europeans should really understand that the key to regaining strength is to end the war, because the war is so costly in terms of lives, in terms of money, that European nations can no longer afford this war, which are the discussions right now. And whatever the end of this war will be, Russia will not disappear from the European map, and we will have to find a way to deal with Russia, as we Europeans have done, well, since the Mongols came in the 13th century.
Thanks, Werner. Gladden.
Well, several people have pointed out in recent years that the European Union made the strange decision to pick a fight with each of the major world powers. And definitely they are not able to do that successfully. There can't be a potential trade war with China and a perpetual footing of the bill of the Ukrainian conflict and a continual diplomatic crisis with the United States all at the same time. So if we get to the end point that you describe, a huge amount of progress will have been made. It's like one of those ultimate scenarios where the fact that the conflict emerges at the end is a sign that all sorts of wonderful and unlikely things have happened between now and then. So I think on the question of military procurement, well, there is still something like, I think nearly 80,000 American troops in Europe. I think it's reasonable for the U.S. to expect that some compensation for footing the bill of European security for so many years would go toward the use of American military equipment. But I think in the long term, it's a package that has to be designed in Europe. And the question is, what are the elements of a strong and successful Europe? If we ask that question today, then a lot of people in positions of power will just answer, well, nations are irrational, and the nationalist history of Europe is irrational, and so the only solution is through a more and more federalized Europe. What has changed a lot in the last couple of years is now the patriotic parties, particularly the parties of Patriots for Europe, have been articulating a European agenda on a different basis, so on the basis of a different package, if you will. The old package is not so credible. It's leading Europe into this place of isolation. And so if over time the new package can emerge that strengthens European nations and brings them together to cooperate on a different basis, then, well, we'll see what happens at the end of that. But definitely there can't be a form of strategic autonomy in Europe which leads to complete isolation. Mm-hmm. So it seems that many of the European political elites aren't aware of this or think that they can, maybe they're just trying to hold on to their positions of power and influence since it would be too complicated for them and too difficult for them to switch sides. At the moment, I suggested in my speech, we have to understand that the forces behind the populist movements that they're dismissing are actually coming from legitimate concerns. Mm-hmm. There were catastrophic decisions that were made. So until the liberal elite are prepared to accept that or prepared to engage with that, they'll continue to isolate themselves.
Great, thanks. Mick?
Yeah, sorry, yes, I agree with that. And I think, your point, Jacob, well, what about, the Americans, there's a difference. Well, of course there are differences. There will always be differences, tensions, things to be negotiated between America and Europe. But I think the first thing to remember is the one thing we can do about improving relations with America would be to stop treating the elected president of America like he's either a lunatic, a Bulgarian, a criminal, or somebody that we don't want to do business with on the world stage. I think that would be a huge step forward if we just started treating him with the respect that his office deserves. And in fact, one of the great things is that the Trump kind of energy in America, I think, it is now coming through in Europe through the patriotic parties. And that brings us to the second point, which is we can't fix American politics, but we can fix our own. We've got to put our own house in order. It's no point us worrying about what the Americans are doing in the end. In Europe, we've got to put our own house in order. And we've got to realise that it's hopeless if we continue to be led by these fantasists who talk about committing a coalition of the willing soldiers to defend the borders of Ukraine and can't even defend their own borders against illegal immigrants in rubber dinghies, right? It's just madness. And so that is the political problem that we can solve. And once we've solved that, and we have the European nations run by people who believe in European nationhood, we will be in a much stronger position to negotiate our way around the world, rather than living in this fantasy of a European Union that's somehow a global power in and of itself, with President von der Leyen making speeches in the middle of the South African jungle. It's just crazy.
Thanks. Okay, I've got time just for maybe a couple of quick questions, if the panel are then able to just really snappily respond to them and close out. So I'd like to get a couple of questions. I think there's some people at the back, but there's certainly a lady at the front, so please.
A problem of language. I don't mean actual language. I think this conference shows that we can have people from a whole lot of different national contexts speaking different mother tongues and have a really informed discussion. But it's when words come to mean something different. So values, for example, it seems to me that a lot of what is talked about as European values are actually prescriptions rather than values, and they owe as much to North American DEI culture as they do to actual discussions about values. So that gets confusing. The other difficulty I have is with the West as an idea, because in a European context, Europe now has changed a lot from where we used to talk about the West and the East. And then in academia, we talk about the global North and the global South, which is completely obfuscatory, in my view. So I wonder if there's something we can maybe do to clarify categories in this new context that we find ourselves in. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Okay, so is there someone at the back? I can't entirely see the lights. Yes, so we'll take the gentleman at the back and then the gentleman at the front. And then I'll just give you all the sentence to respond and to close out, which I know is insufficient, but such is life. Okay, so the gentleman at the back.
Thank you. Yes, Professor Patzelt mentioned the importance of democracy, and I would of history in understanding our European democracies, and I would wholeheartedly agree. But what I think is totally lacking, and I would ask the panel to deal with it, is the fact that the post-war European history is basically unknown. I'm a journalist and a historian. I write about this particular area at Schumann.info and Your Democracy. The original treaty, and Schumann actually based his democracy on Lincoln's idea of government of the people, by the people, for the people. And he explained how this could be expanded. This, I don't see anyone discussing this at the moment. And of course, a lot of people don't want it discussed. He describes how the president of the commission should be elected and not in secret in the Council of Ministers or the European Council. The actual treaties, the early treaties, say that there should be one person, one vote. We've never had that because the nations themselves describe how they're going to elect the members of Parliament, members of the European Parliament, and they have their own rules. Each of them are different. And on the other thing which is quite innovative in the early European history is the fact that there was another body which was a body of associations, which is called the Consultative Committee, which was supposed to be elected, which had consumers, the industrial associations and labor unions involved in it. They should be elected. and they should have legalizing powers. So I'm wondering what can be done about getting these things done. Some of these things are still in the treaties. So how can we actually get the treaties actually working?
Okay, thanks. Okay, gentleman at the front, and then I'll just, as I say, a sentence each to the panel.
Yes.
Yeah.
So Jacob mentioned that what keeps him up at night is the relationship, or the divisive relationship between the United States and Europe. What keeps me up at night is if the war between Ukraine and Russia continues, and if Europe gets involved, and it might escalate to a war, a third world war, or a nuclear war. That would end the Western civilization a lot faster than the lack of our belief in ourselves. So you mentioned it shortly before. What are your solutions to that war, and how do you convince the European people and leadership that you can actually have a relationship that is not critical or undermining of Europe with Russia afterwards if the war gets solved?
Thanks. I should note that lots of things keep me up at night, and not least my 2 young children, but concerns like that one as well. As I say, we've only got time for really brief comments, so just a sentence or two to address something you thought that was interesting from these comments. Pedro, your final thought.
They're quite interesting questions. The first question, I think, I think Europe stands on the values of Christianity, of our history. So we have to cherish those values, the sacred value of human life, the value of justice, the value of freedom, and of course, each one of us can have an axiology of values. We can value one more than another, but in the end, I think Europe or European sovereign nations, they all stand on 3 pillars, and those are 3 pillars we can name them after 3 cities: Rome, Jerusalem, and Athens. So the Christian values with these 3 pillars of civilization, I think that those are the sacred values of the European nations that are among all the European nations, and even among the West, I think. So those are the ones that we should persecute and have them concretized in our societies. For the second question about the Queen von der Leyen, I like that expression very much. Well, we must have more power in the European Parliament, and that will be given to us through the political parties by the people. So if the people in each country chooses to give more power to MEPs that are from political parties that really defend that democracy inside the European Union, I think we can be able to do that. About Russia, well, it's a tricky question, but I think that we have to show a position of strength to Russia, because dictators and tyrants and torcionarios only understand the language of strength, and that is the way that we should do.
Great, thanks. Werner, a final thought.
Well, it's not wrong to think about democracy when we're thinking about Europe and the European Union. After all, democracy was invented in Europe. Yet, it is thoroughly mistaken to think about a democratization of the political system of the European Union. We know how to organize democracy in a nation state. But whatever the European Union is no nation state, and it will, in the foreseeable future, in the lifetime of our grandchildren, I would say, not become a nation state. We don't even have a common language. How can a people emerge, understanding itself as a people without a common language? Well, some hope for artificial intelligence. We all have earpods which translate the things we hear into a language we understand. Maybe this will be the solution one day, but it is not the solution today or in the next decade. So we have simply to accept the European Union is not able to be democratized. Not the parliament, one person, one vote, impossible, nor the Council of Ministers. How can a minister or an ambassador really represent the diverse interests which are active and of importance in a European nation state. So this whole way of thinking is wrong. The European Union is something like a very bureaucratized empire with a benevolent leadership in the best possible case. The best possible case is not the normal case, as we know. So this is a misled discussion. As to Russia, well, we should accept two truths. First of all, politics is a matter of power balance, and somebody wins, somebody loses, and the Russians have won the war. And the second thing is to think, if we do not want to give in to others who we dislike for whatever reason, we should consider and reflect upon the old Latin sentence, which is the motto of NATO, si vis pacem para bellum. If you want to live in peace, you have to prepare for war, not because you want to lead war, but because it is necessary to defend yourself. And Ukraine teaches us the lesson that the West here has done everything wrong what the West could do wrong when handling the whole Ukraine issue.
Thank you. And Gladden.
Once a Latin maxim is quoted, I have nothing left to add, actually. But I think it's fair to say that values is an unsatisfactory term. Yeah. It became very common in modern society, but it's kind of relativistic. And when we talk about questions like, what are the values that should inform the liberal international order, at a certain point, we're really talking about nothing. Or we're talking about something that is less and less clear, less and less powerful. So we're going toward a direction in international affairs where the actors and the motivations are clearer. So we can talk about nations acting in their interests. That's clearly what's happening in Washington, D.C. and outside of the European Union, or exceptions for a few countries, of course. But it doesn't have to be reduced to that. These actors still have motivations, concepts like the West or Western civilization, as including Roman law, Greek philosophy, Judeo-Christian religious culture. These refer to real things. They certainly paper over a lot of important questions. But we should hope that the political actors are thinking about those things and not just about interests. Actually, again, I'm reminded that after the Vice President's speech at the Munich Security Conference, a lot of Europeans reacted by saying, well, there are no more values anymore. This is a purely transactional, interest-based, raw power American administration. I think the next weekend, the Vice President gave an interview saying, well, no, actually, the relationship with Europe matters a lot. After all, where did the ideas come from that informed the formation of law and politics in the United States? But from Europe, European history was standard everywhere. So the concepts that go on top of the use of power or behind it are important, and the work of conservatives is to preserve both.
Great, thank you. Nick, a final thought.
Is that on? Yeah. Just one quick thought about the question which I think is very important about language, because we are dealing with a situation where the political language of the past doesn't really work anymore. What's left, what's right? Values means nothing or everything. And it's very difficult to sit down and invent a new political language to describe the changing world. But I think we could do worse, perhaps, than to go back to some basics of European civilization as a shared value for which we can not only unite the peoples of Europe, but have hands across the ocean. Let's make free speech mean what Spinoza wanted it to mean 350 years ago, that in a free society, any man may think what he likes and say what he thinks. We would include women these days even, of course. That would be a good basis on which to unite the peoples around free speech. And democracy, let's go back to what the Greeks meant by it. The union of the demos, the people, and kratos, power. And let's away with all those leaders who spend their lives, I include the entire European Union bureaucracy in this, trying to make sure that the demos and kratos remain as far away as possible, apart as possible.
Great. Can we give the panel a very warm thank you? There'll be a short coffee break now before the next set of sessions. This will be a slightly shorter break, so please grab a cup of coffee and be ready to resume very shortly. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are going for
Hi, ladies and gentlemen. Hello, welcome back. Welcome back. We've got a really special, very exciting guest to introduce you to now. So please do come and take your seats. You're not going to want to miss this, I can assure you. Please come and take your seats. And welcome back. It's been an incredible day of discussion so far. I've been loving every minute of it, and I hope you have too. And our guest for an address now is, to be honest, a very, very rare thing in European politics. If you think of anyone who was at the helm of a country for a long, long time, and let's just say that in most cases, especially where I'm from in the UK, their reputation seems to shrink and go down enormously quickly as soon as they've left office, to the extent that people barely want to be in the same room as some of our former presidents, such as the disasters that people have kind of presided over of our major politicians. But our guest today is the exact opposite, someone whose intellectual and political stature has, if anything, grown since he left formal politics. He was Prime Minister of the Czech Republic between 1992 and 1997, then President between 2003 and 2013. He currently heads a free market think tank in Prague, the Václav Klaus Institute, which reveals his name. But has published some really important and excellent books, including Brave New West and this year's In Defense of Normalcy. I'm really delighted and very honored to welcome to the stage for a short keynote address, Václav Klaus.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends. Many thanks to the MCC for inviting me to attend this important gathering and to speak here in Brussels. I have to stress the name of the city. For most of you, to come to Brussels is probably quite normal, but not for me. Of course, I visited this city many times during my years as Prime Minister and President of the Czech Republic. But that's the past, that's over. In the last more than a decade, I visited Brussels only once. Brussels has ceased to be the city of my interest. The city is also in many respects much different when compared to the year 1962, when most of you were not yet born, but when I happened to play basketball in an international tournament here. It is now 63 years ago. But the city was really different. It was 9 years ago, in 2016, when I was here last time. I came here to present the Flemish version of my book, Europe All Inclusive. You probably, from the title, understand what it's about. The subtitle was A Brief Guide to Understanding the Current Migration Crisis. This book was highly critical of West European and EU approval, and I deliberately use the term approval of mass migration to Europe, critical of Angela Merkel's slogan, Wir schaffen das, and critical of the widespread European illusory fiction that it's normal to migrate and that everyone has a right to do so. To say that, to accept that is a direct denial of the concept of the nation state, something which is extremely important for all the patriots all over Europe. We see the consequences of such an approval in many places of Europe. Great Britain is probably the leader in this respect. I repeatedly argued that we misinterpret the reasons for migration. Economists, and I'm an economist, usually use two important terms which I find extremely productive and useful: demand and supply. European demand for migrants was much more important as a source of migration than their supply. Not the other way around as it is usually proclaimed. I remember the Belgian public TV being extremely aggressive toward me and my views during that visit. I have almost no similar experience. Former heads of state usually enjoy at least some elementary respect abroad, of course not at home. Since the 1990s, Brussels has become an incorporation of everything a European democrat has to disagree with. I disagree with the suppression of nation states as well as with the glorification of supranational institutions. I disagree with the blocking of elementary principles of market economy and with the promotion of debilitating regulation. Regulation that reminds us who experience communism, it reminds us more and more of the old central planning. Political correctness and the ongoing masterminding of our fates by powerful Brussels elites who rule without elementary checks and balances are equally unacceptable. We all know that these checks and balances are inevitable for democracy to function, but they don't exist in the current EU. Some of us have devoted our lives to opposing such or similar arrangements, which, as many people are now belatedly beginning to understand, are not connected only with the evidently oppressive and tragically non-functioning communism. As we see, they are connected with similar systems based on other collectivistic ideologies as well. I apologize for such a rapid and only proclamatory summary of my position, of my views, but it is impossible to comprehensively discuss these topics in a short conference speech. Let me therefore let me pick up two just two partial topics as examples of what I see as relevant. You decided, I don't know who is that you, but you decided to call today's conference the Battle for the Soul of Europe, or Fighting for the Soul of Europe. Is it a correct and reasonable title? I don't think so. It is a topic not totally new for me. It's a topic I discussed 16 years ago with the distinguished Viennese Cardinal Christoph Schönborn, some of you may know the name, at a discussion forum in the Bavarian city of Passau. The question raised then was, is there a soul of Europe? Or, in a milder form, is there a common idea of Europe? The Europeists, for me, it means the term Europeist, it means the naive advocates of European political unification who organized the debate in Passau in 2009, were searching for a concept that could have a positive Europe integrating effect. I understand, but I disagreed. As I put it then, Europe doesn't have a common idea, it cannot have one, and it doesn't need one. All those three sentences or sub-sentences are, for me, absolutely crucial. Doesn't have a common idea, cannot have one, and doesn't need one. I suggested instead that we look for an authentic common denominator, and I suppose many of us find it in freedom. In freedom, something which truly belongs to Europe. But freedom is not the soul of Europe. Freedom is a social, or better said, societal arrangement in which an individual man or woman is not controlled or masterminded by the state. Fighting for freedom doesn't mean fighting for a pan-continental community or for a culturally totally homogeneous area. Europe is not homogeneous, as we all see. We also shouldn't pretend, as some of our opponents do, that there is a common history of Europe. There is, of course, not. And we shouldn't artificially invent the soul of Europe. Such efforts can only lead to the falsification of history and of today's reality. Our continent has neither a common idea nor a soul. The existence of a few generally accepted values is important, but doesn't create a soul. I always stress that the undisputable existence of a European civilizational space is something entirely different from the artificial construct called the EU, called the European Union. Let's not mix these two things together. I must say, listening very carefully in the last 2 or 3 hours to the discussion here, I was absolutely frustrated. I almost didn't want to leave the room and throw away my prepared notes. You know, the permanent confusion between Europe and European Union is also almost a definitional mark of this afternoon's conference. I think it's a tragic, tragic mistake. You know, European Union is not Europe. We should always stress whether we talk about Europe or European Union. The same mistake was discussed here about America, Europe and America. Are we really talking seriously about America, meaning Bolivia, Ecuador, Canada, Jamaica, or do we mean the United States of America? It's a trivial thing which, as a professor at the university, the student wouldn't pass the examination to make such an elementary and fundamental mistake. The same is true about Europe and European Union. Please, let's think about it in a more serious way. I asked artificial intelligence whether I had ever used the term soul of Europe. One should believe the artificial intelligence. The answer was no. But he, or I don't know, maybe it is she, the artificial intelligence suggested to me that I had several times used the term collective psyche of Europe, collective psyche of Europe. Even that, I must say, I used only ironically as something promoted by the European elitists in their efforts to advance the very questionable project of European political unification. Let's look at the EU pragmatically and realistically. But I stress at the EU, not about Europe. And when I listen to here this afternoon permanently, Europe must, Europe forgets. I wanted to jump. Europe is not an behavioral entity. Europe doesn't behave. In the social sciences, in my economic theory, Europe is not a subject. Europe is just a conglomeration of nations, and we can define it in a various way. So let's pragmatically and realistically look at the EU. EU is a grouping of countries which have some common interests and want to pursue them together. That's the only rational and meaningful discussion, not soul. The economist would talk about the existence or non-existence of the so-called public goods at a continental level. Again, a very useful term, public goods. I must say that the economists know that there are not many public goods at the European, at the continental level, but the European Union and Madame von der Leyen are pretending that everything is a public good at the continental level, which is tragically wrong. We can define public goods at the level of the lower entities, not just the state, even below them. So that's my first topic, not to confuse Europe and European Union, and to talk about European Union in a pragmatic and meaningful way. Let me turn to my second topic. I attend one European forum after another. European society is affluent enough to generously finance such gatherings. One of the prominent figures at such meetings is Mario Draghi. You may know the name. Of course, I could name some other well-known candidates for an optimal conference speaker, but he is the one for me. I don't know whether you studied his recent Rimini speech he did on the 22nd of August this year. His recent Rimini speech motivated me to call him at a recent forum in Lugano the Gorbachev of Ursula von der Leyen's European Union. He speaks as a typical perestroika man, if anyone still remembers that term. Draghi wants to keep the basis of the current EU arrangements intact. Gorbachev also wanted to preserve communism, but aimed to make it technocratically. After the fall of communism, we, in most of Central and East European countries, rejected the idea of perestroika, this form of a third way, and declared instead that we wanted capitalism, that we wanted the first way. I don't intend to give a history seminar here. I just want to say that I talk about it because I am convinced that we similarly need a systemic change in the whole of Europe now, not just what used to be called the perestroika. The markets are not free. The markets have been, in the last decades, fatally undermined. The markets has been so heavily taxed, regulated, and repressed in the last decades that instead of an information or digital revolution or digitalization, we need a return to free markets. Digitalization is not the opposite of an overregulated market, but a method for making regulation easier and more efficient. The ambition of the European political elites is to regulate us more effectively. Today, the economies of EU countries are in a subordinate position. The economy is once again dictated by politics. This is the issue of the day. The Green Deal is the most evident embodiment of green policies, and in spite of all the criticism from many reasonable opponents, the EU is falling deeper and deeper into this trap. The EU countries are more and more accepting this irresponsible fallacy. To get rid of it, we need free speech as the only way to come to a fundamental change, not just to another perestroika. It's written time up, okay. I'm convinced the MSS conference is a rare event here in Brussels, which makes a free exchange of views possible. Thank you for inviting me to come and to speak here. Thank you very much for your attention.
No, it was a delight to have you. Thank you so much for that address. And I have to say, we have enough faith in the concept of our conference that we're happy to have people, even as esteemed as Mr. Klaus, come and tell us that the title and the whole conception, and indeed a whole morning of debate and discussion, is based on so many fundamental misconceptions. But it is, as I say, we have faith in what we've set out to do. And actually, as it happens, I don't disagree with lots of what was said, especially the need to revive our continent in terms of its dynamism, its freedom, its and the economic underpinnings of all the nation states, which are so terribly imperiled by some of the most crazy environmental policies which have been experimented upon all of us. And that's the topic of our next discussion, which is really about if there might be such a thing as patriotic economics, whether we can reform what is a sick continent, which means a very sick series of individual nation states. We were talking earlier about Europe and America, and one of the sad things, or one of the frustrating things that does sadden me as a European, is the total and rightful contempt that many Americans hold European societies in, for the simple reason of how lacking in economic dynamism and any sense of kind of can-do spirit that we seem to find ourselves in. And if you're like me, you think that the central institutions of the European Union have played a tremendous part in this, in the crazy, as I say, green ideology which has dominated our continent, which has affected everything from the ability to build houses, to start businesses, to have power, heating, and all the other fundamentals of a prosperous economy. So that's some of the themes that we'd like to really dig into in this next session. If Europe is the sick man of the world economy, or if European nations are the sick men of the world economy, what can we do to revive this? And also, when we talk about being patriots or patriotic, is there any other answer than the free market answer that comes to how we can deliver prosperity for our people? So to tackle this, we've got a number of wonderful speakers to address this theme through some keynotes. I'm afraid to say we'd advertised that Barbara Bonte, MEP of Vlaams-Belang, is not able to be with us. She's unfortunately picked up an illness and is very apologetic, but she won't be with us. So that just means that we'll have a little bit more time, which every cloud has a silver lining. We'll have a little bit more time for discussion with the audience. But to our first speaker, really delighted to introduce someone who, when we were doing the research for this conference, people were recommending his Substack to us, which addresses a number of fundamental themes related to Europe and the world economy. And I do recommend that to you all. You can find it easily under his name. He's the Chief Commercial Officer of Safe Clean. He's from Norway, and I'm delighted to welcome to the stage Andreas Svardland.
Thank you very much for having me. The task of a leader is to take people from where they are to where they never have been, Henry Kissinger said. And leaders are what we now need, and we need more of them. But where should we find them? For inspiration, we can look to nature and to one of the most resilient civilizations out there. In the ant colony, most ants follow the pheromone trail laid down by other ants, because that is sufficient once the food has been found. When the system works, the system rewards the lion ants. the administrators, the optimizers, and the guardians of process. But when the track is broken, it is always the wandering ants, those who deviate from the line, who rise to the challenge and says, "Follow me, I know the way." When the trail is broken, those are the ones, the wandering ants. Those are the ones that act out as the strategists. Those are the ones who are the entrepreneurs, the innovators, those who win the wars and move society forward. Evolution have built a system that ensures both adaptability and efficiency. But yet we have built a society where those meant to follow now leads. Because there are two ways to achieve economic growth. The first way is to create something entirely new. And when you have something that nobody else has, you hold a monopoly and with it, high margins. This defined the American economy in the 50s, the 60s, and in the 70s. Through what Joseph Schumpeter called creative destruction, we saw the rise of new technologies. They were allowed, even encouraged to grow, even when they destroyed the old. And we got nuclear power, hypersonic flights, internet, microchip. We got the very technologies that allowed an effective deterrence strategy. The second path to economic growth is to take what you have, copy it, modify it, and sell it to an ever larger market. The downside by copying is that your margin shrinks. And since your business model relies on constant market expansion, you need ever larger companies. Companies that, because of their thin margins, needs to be endlessly efficient. They need cheap labor. They need cheap raw materials. They need cheap energy. They need cheap currency. And they need cheap credit. They need political protection and they need regulatory control. And this is the model we used to grow our economies after the fall of the Soviet Union. We took what worked in one place and we made it work everywhere. We followed the logic of the lion ant. We globalized and we optimized. And now the trail is broken. We have reached the end of the market. We have developed a system where values created from financialization is seen as equal to values created from production. The downside is that financialization and creating money from money and not from production, that only works as long as the system works. It brings you deeper into debt. It deepens your dependencies. But in war, it also ensures defeat. And that is the trajectory we need to break. And trying to manage this transition through a top-down, process-driven initiative, that will fail. And once again, we have to put our trust into the builders, the entrepreneurs, and the innovators, the wandering ants. And to our great fortune, both warfare, industrial history, and research on change management have shown us what actually does work. General Stanley McChrystal realized in 2006, when Al-Qaeda in Iraq were winning the war on terror, that he had to structurally reorganize how the US task force were operating. Admiral Nelson understood that he had to do things completely differently if he were to win the Battle of Trafalgar and prevent the invasion of Britain. And Frederick the Great understood that only if he empowered his soldiers to act and to take responsibility on lowest possible level, only then could he defeat armies twice his size. They all understood the same truth. They understood that real change begins when you devolute power from centralized authorities to those with the greatest proximity to the problem, with those with the greatest situational awareness. Real change begins when we empower people to lead and to take responsibility under a shared vision. The current operating model benefits the nations we no longer trust. Europe, in order to keep its people employed without having production, will be forced to print more money, will be forced to take on more debt, and inflate the economy with money less worth. And the raw material producing nations, they are not stupid. They understand that the currency they are paid in is less worth, and prices will rise. And first, they will insist on being paid in yuan. Then, they will insist on long-term contracts priced in gold, oil, or Bitcoin, whatever is not controlled by Frankfurt. Then, when we no longer can pay, they will ship the lithium to Shenzhen instead. Chinese intelligence services, they don't need to influence contrarian and fringe actors within Europe. When the Ministry of State Security run their influence campaigns in Europe, it is enough to say to the lobbyists, the technocrats, the bureaucrats, the lawyers, the NGOs, the incumbent industry clusters, how important their job is, and how vital rules, law, and regulations are for social stability. And we will follow the pheromone trail right into Chinese dominance. But allowing incumbent industries to collapse will send people rioting out in the streets, unless they understand the risk, understand the danger, and understand that there is a plan, and experience immediate and small short-term wins. In my hometown of Rjukan in 1906, we built the world's most modern city. We built the largest hydroelectric power plant in the world. The first winter, everyone got electric light, hot water, and free housing, all paid for by the factory. Wages doubled, bills dropped, and the kids were sent to a brand new school. That is a small, immediate win that stops riots, creates secure jobs, and creates momentum. It give the families, let them feel it before they are asked to trust it. If we ensure to place some sugar in the environment, the wandering ants will still be there, and they will act out of conviction and belief in the system that we are going to create. So devolution or resilience begins with the devolution of power. When we have more people leading, we will get more momentum.
Brilliant, thank you. A wonderful speech and a great extended metaphor. I really very much enjoyed that. Our next speaker, I'm delighted to welcome to the stage, is someone who brings a genuine wealth of expertise on a whole host of economic issues, and someone that I know some people in the office have been hoping to get to one of our events for quite some time. So I'm really delighted to welcome to the stage the president of the Warsaw Enterprise Institute and journalist, Thomas Wroblewski.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the invitation. I'm always amazed here in Brussels. You hear a lot of stories, how the city works and how the EU works. Last 5 years, I had the chance to watch it closely, being in the European Economic Social Council, and I'm thinking in dismay how this operates. I've always been thinking what's the difference between dictatorships and EU democracy, how to define. And so, well, dictator can single-handed change any official, any politician just to preserve his power. In EU, citizens can veto out any government, can participate in an election, as long as this government preserves power of Brussels. They can vote as much as they want, but there's very little they can change with that. This is not a joke, and you know that. This happened. It's happened in Greece, this happened in France, in Denmark, in a lot of countries, that people are deciding and then watching. There's no influence whatsoever what they wanted. The title of this panel asks about Europe economic decline, and yes, obviously we all know that Europe is the sick man of the world. This is strangled with regulations, starved with all the innovations, terrified of all the risks, and it's completely unperforming. You know all the numbers about GDP comparing to the US. Actually, any index you look, we are behind the US, except how much free time we have in the European Union, probably, and regulations. The thing is, and it has been said already by several people that just want to reiterate, that EU economic decline is not a power failure. It's not a bug. This is its feature. This is how it was designed. It has no right to function. It has no right to build strong economy. Whatever, how many regulations we'll bring, how many new projects and how many new white papers we prepare, it won't work. The system was designed because economic decisions are depoliticized. They're taken away from people's hand. Economic decisions are made by institutions of European Commission, some institutions, they're made in Frankfurt and Brussels, and we have no power over how this economy and what direction is going. This is how it was designed, at least after 1993, after Maastricht, that's for sure. I don't know, initially maybe there were some thought and ideas and people hope this will go different direction, but afterwards it's the way it's designed. There's a great American historian, Quinn Slobodian, and he been writing about those architects of European integration. He called them Geneva School of Neoliberalism. And he, I'll quote it, they created transnational economic constitution that will lock in market policies beyond reach of democratic interference. So the people would have no power over economic, and they did succeed. How many times you looked at there are protests in Brussels, in your own countries, The people are protesting against new regulations. There is some promise about changes, less bureaucracy coming from Brussels. There we will discuss, maybe we'll delay some provisions, but then again, everything happens the way it was designed. So this economic decline is a part of what I call European economic paradox, that something nobody talks about it here in Brussels, that you cannot have at the same time economic growth, economic dynamism, genuine democracy, and a structure of European Union. Those three will never work together. You can't marry them. European structure, democracy, and growth won't stay together. Those two first, or European democracy, European construction. Economic dynamism, growth economic, requires the ability to adapt, to change, to experiment. You need to fail, try again. You have to just experiment. You need the rivals. You have to have someone you learn from and learn from your own mistakes. European Union doesn't allow you mistakes. This is not only market competition that we are talking, but it's also competition between states. You need to have to test different policies. This is something Hayek been saying about discovery of procedures. He's been saying that countries and their policies also should compete between each other, learn from each other, learn from the mistakes, and pick the best solution. Here, you have 27 countries. We have one size fits all and no experimentation. We just get one design product, one regulation, DSA, DMA, Fit for 55, and fit it into your system. If it doesn't work, try harder. If it doesn't work, try even harder. If it kills you, well, we'll subsidize. We'll see what we can do so you at least won't die. The same thing is with democracy. Democracy requires change. When people go and vote, they expect that things will change, especially in economy. This is the first thing that comes to people's mind, that they are unhappy with their government, they're unhappy with their dynamics of economy, the job growth, salaries, inflation, so they change the government. And then what happens? Nothing. You can vote as much as you want, but you won't change Green Deal. You won't change ETS, because this is our power over the economy. So we all know that. I mentioned the Greeks who were trying to change their system. Dutch were trying. A lot of governments and a lot of people were voting to change the government policies, and nothing happened. So this frustration is growing and being bigger and bigger. There's this great, I think the greatest living democratic theorist, Adam Przeworski, Professor Przeworski. And he showed that democracy can work only when elections have consequences. So this is why we don't have revolutions, because we slowly change the system. We adapt to the change. We don't like conservatives, so we vote and we get socialists. We don't like socialists, we get some liberals. And we do those changes. And slowly we are adapt to the situation and to the people's needs. When you have European Union, you can vote as much as you want, but the change won't come. This is frustration that we saw in the history several times. It's not something new. If you just take the Weimar Republic, they have a decade of voting conservatives and socialists and changing. But they couldn't change the system, economic system, because of the Treaty of Versailles. Because you have all the decisions were made in Paris or London. So you know how it ended. The frustration just accumulated and boiled over. So the same thing you have here. You have people who are getting more and more frustrated, unable to do any change. Now, you officials love to talk about threats to democracy, populism, threats to the democracy. They always point out to the same suspect. Hungary, now Slovakia, they didn't vote how they're supposed to, Czech Republic. When we had an election in Poland, Ursula von der Leyen been saying that we are afraid of people who want to destroy Europe. Then we got elected new president. It was the same, and now they were criticizing him for that he vetoed regulation modeled on European censorship regulation on DSA. He just vetoed this regulation in Poland. So they say he made a threat for democracy. Well, let me ask you, who is more danger to democracy? Is a president who would like the free speech to thrive? Sometimes it's unpleasant. Sometimes the words are not what you would like to hear. Sometimes it's tough, but at least the debate is thriving. People are talking and trying to discuss and get to the point. Is he a threat? Or the threat is a system that the president of European Commission can negotiate billions in vaccine contracts, in text messages, pharmaceutical COOs, then says, well, I lost it, I don't know where we put it. And then even when court decides that it was neglect of a violation of transparency rules, well, as he's been said here, Queen von der Leyen, nothing happens. She still isn't untouchable in the office. So you have the politicization of politics, of economic decision, and now also of judicial system. So like people feel powerless. Whatever you do, you can vote, you can go to court, still things are happening. The same people are staying there and making the same decisions, whatever you do. So what is the alternative for me?
We'll get to some of it.
Okay, so I will talk later about alternative. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that's because it's something I actually want to come on to a little bit in some of the discussion. So that will definitely be one we'll pick up with the audience in a moment. But for now, our final speaker on this topic, or the final keynote on this topic, will be from another person who's been around us for a little while at MCC Brussels and at MCC, someone who brings a lot of interest and energy to all of these discussions. He's very active on social media and podcasting, and I always try and keep up with his tremendous output on social media. It's always of a very, very high quality. Grown to not just trust his economic judgment, but also appreciate his insights on wider themes related to culture and politics. Really delighted to welcome the head of Centre for Applied History at MCC Budapest, Ralph Schorhammer. Welcome.
Good afternoon. Thanks, everybody, for being here. I know it's been a long day already, and I promise I'll start a little dry, but I come to sex, drugs, rock and roll, Taylor Swift, Sabrina Carpenter. So if you bear with me for the first 3 or 4 minutes, I promise you that hopefully it will be both entertaining and a little bit uplifting as well. Well, the title of this panel is Patriotic Economics, and I think the first obligation or the first duty of every patriot is to speak the truth to oneself, but of course also to the people. So the bad news I want to start with is, speaking the truth is that the structural problems Europe finds itself will demand considerable sacrifices in order to turn the ship around. So there will be no easy fixes. Now, the good news, I think, is that most people in Europe, from Eastern Europe to Central Europe to Western Europe, are absolutely willing to make those sacrifices if, and I think this is the big if they feel that these sacrifices are fairly and equally distributed. Now, I want to give you a few examples why I think that this is one of the main issues of our time. As you know, Germany is dominating the headlines, but it's very often the small things that are mentioned but are not talked about enough. So the Germans have what is called the Bürgergeld, or the citizens' money, which is basically a discount version of the unconditional basic income. Now, as it turned out over the last couple of years, about 51% of the recipients of this Bürgergeld, or citizen money, don't have a German passport. So if the German government would be honest, they should call it by now a non-citizen money, because that is actually what it is. Now, but that, of course, is just one part of the story. The other one is that Der Spiegel, a rather, I would say, left-leaning German weekly, once tried to prove that, in fact, it is a lie to say that non-working or not having regular employment pays off in Germany. Unfortunately, their study backfired, because what they found out was that if you work a full-time job at a minimum wage, you just get 500 euros a month more than somebody who doesn't work at all and only lives off welfare. Now, as you can imagine, this is at some point frustrating the productive part of society. Not because they don't want to be productive, but because everybody, every one of us in this room as well, has a sense of fairness. So if I go to the office every day from 9 to 6 and I work my, pardon my French, my ass off, and the other guy in the other apartment never goes to work, but only makes 500 euros less, and maybe does a little thing at the side, maybe a little bit, black market work, maybe selling drugs or working in a coffee shop, whatever. Ultimately, he's going to make more than I do, even though I work 40 hours a week, 4 weeks a month. I think is not fair. So people will retreat from productive work. France, another, I think, a good example. Everybody always says, well, those French, they can't even increase their retirement age by a meager 2 years. Why is everybody revolting in the streets? Why can't they do it? But I would argue that one of the reasons for this is that in certain sectors, pensioners or people in retirement in France now have a higher income than people who work. So once again, asking people who are currently working to work longer, to pay more taxes for people who are no longer working but make more money than they do, is a form of unfairness that I think many people feel that it is. Now, as I said at the beginning, the first step is to be honest. Do we really believe, maybe you do, I have my doubts, that even if the much wanted right-wing revolution should come in Europe, will then these new parties, these new leaders, be willing to touch the welfare systems, to touch the unsustainable nature of these systems? We currently see with Donald Trump in the United States, for all the good things that he's doing, he does not dare to touch the American welfare system, and I'm afraid that we would see something similar in Europe. Now, this unfairness, at least on occasion, leads to some funny stuff as well. So there was a case in the United Kingdom that of course I'm easily entertained, that I enjoyed quite a bit. A 21-year-old young gentleman with a learning disability had, understandably, some problems, let's say, approaching the opposite sex. Don't you worry. The British state was immediately on his case and decided to spring for an all-expenses-paid trip to the Netherlands where he could indulge in the services of Dutch prostitutes. Now, I'm not criticizing the lack of patriotism of that English gentleman because apparently he couldn't find a British prostitute. What I'm criticizing is that at the same time, when you have people in Britain who wait 10 years for a hip replacement and can get one, some other guy has a shagging party in Amsterdam. Like, this creates a fundamental sense of unfairness, and this will be a huge problem as we move forward. Now, but there is another problem that we have to touch on as well. We did not talk, or maybe I didn't hear it, we did not talk enough about the fundamental problem of demographics in Europe. We very often mention, what do young people think? And I think that is important. We talk about what the next generation is facing. But my question is, at some point we have to say, which next generation? If you look at fertility rates all over Europe, even successful economies, we have an economist from Poland here, right? Poland had an undoubtable economic miracle over the last 30 years. It was fantastic what happened there. But if you look at their fertility rate, I think the only country that has currently a lower one is Ukraine. And they're probably in 100, 150 years, how many Poles will be left? How many Germans? How many Italians? How many French? So these systems are unsustainable. And what does this lead to? It leads to systems that start to atrophy. We talk about Schumpeter, creative destruction, the importance of innovation. But let me tell you, I don't think that really innovate that much anymore. Let me give another example. Many of you, I suppose, like watching movies. Before the year 2000, 75% of all movies, of kind of all the major top-grossing movies, were originals. By now, 75%, so the same number, is either prequels, sequels, spin-offs of the prequel, sequel. I'm sure that any one of you has seen Spider-Man 1 to 65, or I think there are now, I don't know, I think there's a Lord of the Rings and the prequel to Lord of the Rings and the follow-up to the Lord of the Rings. So it's all everything. And this is another one of this issue. We don't really create anything original anymore. They did a study about lyrics in music. It turns out that in no time in history have the lyrics been as similar as they are today. So basically every musician, as I said, from Taylor Swift to Sabrina Carpenter, they're singing all the same. Don't get me wrong, I really like them. But I'm always surprised when I try to get tickets for yet another final farewell tour by the Rolling Stones, and they're always sold out. My parents are in the early 80s, as are the Rolling Stones. But it turns out that even the young generation is still enthralled by them, which I think is great. But if I think back when I was younger, and I'm sure many of you when you were younger, I mean, did you listen to the very same music your parents did? Probably not. You had a revolutionary phase. Rock and roll came up and punk came up, all these kind of things. This is no longer really happening. The internet, I have to say, is becoming more boring. I'm generation MySpace. And I have to admit that every MySpace page, at least back in the day, had more creativity than if you look at YouTube these days, where every thumbnail looks the same. Go to a bookshop at an airport. Almost every book cover these days looks the same. Like, there is a significant lack of creativity, of inspiration. There is this one meme that whenever something in politics happens, it's from the movie Downfall, you know, where Adolf Hitler is complaining to his generals how everything is going wrong, and then it's underlined with different subtitles. This meme started 10 years ago. We still do it. We still do memes with the minions. And again, I love memes, but I feel I've seen them all. The same is true in architecture. There's this claim that we can no longer build beautifully because it's too expensive. That is not true. I was talking to an architect. They said, no, we could easily build very cheap like they did in the 19th century. We just no longer want to do it. Now, the problem is, you might say, oh, my God, this is just another middle-aged guy complaining about the new generation. But the problem with this is, if you do not have inspiration, you also can no longer have innovation. And what you also then do is you move from a society that creates to a society that manages. And this is what we experience at the moment. Let me give you one of my favorite examples. They wanted to build a wind farm in Norfolk in the UK. Now, I think they still haven't done it, but the environmental impact study and the permits are now at 13,275 pages. This is more than all the works of Tolstoy combined, plus Marcel Proust's In Search of Lost Time, all 7 volumes added to it. So we no longer create literature, but by God, we are really good in creating litigation. And these, I believe, are things that hold us back. And I'm not sure, coming to my concluding points, if the state and the government can solve this problem. There is a tendency now, I believe, both on the political right and the political left, to call for the state to solve these problems, to say the state has to do X. But I think one of the main things that we have to do in the future, to get the state out of people's lives. Inspiration is found in privacy, in your own life, and it cannot be created by the state. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I feel like I've seen all the memes. It's the saddest thing I've heard someone say for a long time. I could really feel your pain when you well, not enough. Anyway, we'll share some fun memes after this and try and redeem your faith. But please, in a minute, I want to come out and get questions and comments from the audience. So if you'd like to make your way to the microphones, there's one at the back. I remind you, there's 2 at the front. Do come along. But I wanted to just ask a pointed question to which I really want a kind of snappy answer, because I think in different ways you all touched on something that I just heard again from Ralph, which is that at some point to reformulate, reorient these economies, which have become so stagnant and so stuck in our ways of doing things, there's going to be someone who has to bear some of the pain. And maybe the answer is all of us, and maybe the answer is pensioners, or maybe the answer is the left-wing answer where they just say, well, blame the bankers, whatever. I feel like we have to have some kind of a sense of who's going to who's going to have to bear some pain in this transition that's necessary? Or maybe you might think no one. But if you could just answer that question, because I think it helps us frame some of this discussion. Andreas, do you have a tentative answer to that question?
We are entering a very volatile period. We used to see multipolarity as a good thing, with more democracy, more inclusion and equality. The period we're entering is very different. It's very many dogs biting, and they will continue to bite, and that means that we will have redistribution of the money that will exist within the system. War is a way to fight out that inflation we have and to redistribute. Hopefully, we can distribute before that, redistribute before that happens, and by normally it is the rich people, they always manage. It is the pension funds that will take the deepest bidding. It will probably be so this time as well, but hopefully we can include the people so they have a firm income and that we maintain social stability on the way at least.
And Thomas, does someone have to bear the brunt of a kind of major reorientation of our economies, or is there another way out of this?
Well, I don't see any way out simple, and I don't think that the European Union in any way we can do it. This is what Ronald Reagan was saying, we just run out of someone else's money. There's no way we can refinance ourselves. And days after days, not only in politics but also in economy, we see how powerless we are. That all the illusions about creating like mega regulational world coming from European doesn't work. Just world doesn't listen to us anymore, doesn't obey. And more so, we see how the other countries, and especially US, but not only, imposes their rules on us. So the choice is not whether we can reignite our economy. It's choice like, whom are we gonna subdue to? Either it will be China or the US or a little there, here, a little there. I don't. With the European Union as a construct, there is no way we can get out of it. I mean, this is the same thing we were talking about other panels. We need democracy, and we need competition, rivalry. This is all what the European Union for centuries been. All those small countries in rivalry, trying to get better than others, with one concept, with one Christianity, with one common idea. So we do have ideas, we have the common, but we are no longer in rivalry. We are not competing. So if you look at the indexes with innovations, robotics, anywhere you go, we are losing out. So it's not like we charmed that somehow, that we were going to say that we have so many good scientists. Yes, we have a lot of great scientists, but don't look where they started. Look where they end up. They end up in the US, or now they will be starting doing jobs in India or other places, because that's where they can prosper. So I don't see way out.
Yeah, then Ralph, should someone bear some of this? I know you were talking about fairness, but I want you to be unfair for a second. If we have to do a big reorientation, there's going to be some losers. Who do they have to be?
Well, I think I mean, this is going to make me sound like a socialist, but I think, of course, you want to distribute it in a way that those who can absorb the hits better than others, that they have to take more of this. But we had, if you look at what happened over the last couple of years, the last 30 years, I mean, it's no doubt that particularly the working class suffered most what is generally described as globalization, the loss of manufacturing, the loss of factories. And it's not just about the production. It's about what comes with production. One of the most ludicrous things, unfortunately, once again coming out of Germany, but as an Austrian, I feel I know it's a kin people to me. As I don't know, I'm culturally Austrian, but civilizational, I feel German. Is this idea that you can move your production to another country, but you can keep innovation in your country? I mean, the history of innovation is that you get it if you do something. So if you have the car factory, this factory will produce innovation because they're doing the thing. So to say, okay, you all sit in an office and think all day how to build the perfect machine, but the actual machine building happens in China, I don't think that this is going to work. And this is, I think, one of the wheels that we can turn, that we can fine-tune.
Great. I want to see, if people want to speak to the microphones, please, yes. So we'll take you. Is there someone at the back that I'm missing with the bright lights? Okay, so there's this gentleman here, then there's that gentleman, then I think there's another person coming. So we'll first have yourself. Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah, just speak directly into the mic and it will start talking to you. Yeah.
Hello. So through all these conferences, we have talked a lot about immigration, and mainly kind of in a negative sense. And Milton Friedman had this thought about how at the start of the 20th century, lots of people, mainly from Europe, were migrating to the Americas, to the United States, Argentina, etc. And from the perspective of the people in Americas, it was a really good thing, and immigration was taken positively. And now it's viewed in a more negative sense. And Milton Friedman argues that the problem is that before there was not really a welfare state, and now there is. So my question is, don't you think that the actual problem is the welfare state, and that many of the problems that come from immigration, many of the problems that we suffer from immigration actually come from the welfare state and how it is formulated? Thank you.
Great, thanks. I'm going to take a couple of them. So there's a gentleman at the back, and then there's this gentleman over here on my right. Yeah.
Is the mic on? Yeah, all right. The first speaker mentioned the possibility of a monetary system backed by gold or oil or Bitcoin. Does the panel see any of the great powers today switching over to such a system, maybe the BRICS nations or the USA? And then as well, for the coming economic troubles, do you see the euro as an impediment to solving these, or as maybe an integral part of the solution? Yep, right.
Great, thanks. Okay, yeah, the gentleman here.
Yeah, I'm not really an economist, but so I just wanted to ask the panel if, for clarification, does the panel agree that there is a distinction between what classical economists call the distinction between productive labor and unproductive labor, in which you could characterize unproductive labor as the kind of casino economy, where a casino can make revenue without really contributing to society? Because it seems to me that a normal economy has a material economy with a financial system attached to it, while our economy seems to be a financial system with a material economy hanging on to it. And it seems to me that the defenders of the financial system could say like, yeah, but we could just invest in new factory plants. But there is an aspect of time to it. It takes 20, 30 years to make new factory plants. So I don't know, like, does the panel agree with this distinction between productive and unproductive labor? And do you think that Europe can make fast factory plants?
Great, thanks. Okay, I think I see two more people, so I'll come back out for some more questions. I just want to get some very quick answers. I mean, maybe, Andreas, you can take that question that was just asked, because you were drawing a similar kind of distinction in many ways in your opening remarks. And I mean, I know a lot of people on the right are basically free marketeers. A lot of conservatives have free market impulses, but it's under the workings of something like a free market, arguably, that's led to this kind of financialization, unproductive economy, whatever you might like to call it?
So the answer is very much the same to several of the questions that have been raised. And to start with the first question I heard, with regards to immigration, a nation can absorb immigration as long as the productivity is high. But as soon as productivity falls, it becomes a burden instead. That also relates to the gradual financialization of the economy. As soon as we outsource the industry, we have to, in order to keep people employed, we need to give them something else to do instead. So we create these new artificial occupations, with more types of middle layer leaders, more types of bureaucrats, more types of people doing not really productive stuff. And at the same time, since we are no longer producing, we are forced to print the money instead. And we get this financialized economy.
Yeah, great. Yeah, no, please add to that, Thomas.
I would like to on immigration. I mean, Poland is one of very few European countries that we can say we are a success story. And there's one we did, Warsaw Enterprise Institute, we did a big project on it. Why it happened? Because 85% of foreigners are employed, they pay taxes, and we are actually doing fine on it. We don't have the problems also you see in some European countries on the street. And the reason is that we don't have a welfare state in terms of immigrants. They don't get any benefits. You don't get any benefits in Poland as a foreigner. You have to work. So actually, Germans are right to complain that a lot of migrants are coming from Poland to Germany, but they're not going to Germany. They're going to welfare states. They don't care where they're going to stay. I mean, so people who will stay in Poland, they know that they can't sustain, they can't support themselves without having a job. And a lot of things come with it. If you have to have a job, if you have to work to live in the country, you have to adopt to some rules. You have to listen to your employer, how you have to dress, how you have to behave, and what you should do. So obviously we have some incidents, but it's completely different story than you hear in Europe. So I don't think that the solution is simple. Just stay out of welfare.
Can I push you a little bit on that? Because it seems to me that one of the elements of whatever you want to call the global system in the wake of at least the end of the Cold War, maybe even since before that, the system of globalization, which lots of populist patriots in this room or have been at this conference over today have begun to get rid of all the elements of the idea that culture is globalized, that is all the same, that people can move and adopt whatever customs they want, and that all of the globalization of culture. But one thing that we seem, and maybe for good reasons you might say, but we seem less able to give up the globalization of economy in the same respect. And that question about Friedman, I think, got to the heart of it, because you had people who were like the ideological proponents of a system of globalization were very, very sympathetic to what we'd now call mass migration. And I agree with you that it's better if we're going to have migrants who should be working, but that doesn't actually, I think, get to the core of lots of people's concerns about the era of mass migration.
There's one more point in economic theory when it comes to migration. If you lower the barrier to enter the country, you allow the worst, not kind of people, because people are the same, but worst quality of workers come to your country. If you just open the borders, you come over, there's no problem. You don't need the papers, you don't need any skills, you don't need to fill up any forms, you just come in. And it will give you welfare, so you just lower barrier. Then two things happened. One is that you're getting people who are just want to come to your country and who are unable to fill up the need for jobs. And the second, the people who are quality, high quality, real doctors, engineers, won't come to the same country. Because for them, this is, for example, I don't want to put any names of the countries, but once people are coming from the country which their image been destroyed. Oh, this is one of typical of those. Yeah. So, and you don't. So the doctor from the same country won't come there.
No,
his reputation will be already destroyed before he started the work.
This is classic thing people say about migration to Europe versus migration to the United States of America. That they seem to get the higher quality ones. But Ralph, do you want to pick up on any of these points, particularly maybe whether this question about productive and unproductive?
Yeah, well, two. One is I think when we talk about reserve, I think gold is probably returning to its traditional state as a global reserve asset, replacing at some point U.S. Treasuries. But before we kind of get bogged down in these details, let's return to the main theme of this panel, which is patriotic economics. So I think that term already tells you that it's not just free market economics, it's patriotic economics. And I believe what that means is that, and I think we can go into this later with other questions, is how do you pursue an economic policy that then one would define as patriotic. So I'll give you a quick example, and this is, I think, the issue we have at the moment. I would be willing, and this I said, I think many Europeans as well, if we would say, okay, inflation is unbearably high at the moment, but why is that the case? If the argument for it would be things are a little bit more expensive, but on the other side, we are producing them at home. On the other side, we keep the innovation. We create conditions for future know-how. I think people would be willing to say, okay, under these conditions, I'm willing to accept slightly higher prices. But again, if you look at what's going on in Europe, prices are higher, not because we do some kind of neo-mercantilist or neo-protectionism. They are higher because we have idiotic energy policies. And I'm feeling so bad, and I apologize to the Germans in the audience, but the German turning off of the nuclear power plants is the best example here. I mean, if you drive the inflation up not because you do something to have a positive long-term effect or because it's driven by national security, by patriotic ideas, but simply because you pursue an ideology that ultimately is also harming your own people, you get the bad results without any of the potential goods.
Great. I want to come out and try and get the last of the few questions. I think there was this lady at the front, then there's a gentleman towards the back. So yeah, you please, and then the gentleman at the back. Yeah, go on.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to ask Ralph a bit more about the question about youth and innovation, because I want to kind of question why there is a declining productivity in young people, and also ask whether it can be compatible with creativity. Because if you look at universities and education at the moment, all creative pursuits have been instrumentalized in the name of productivity. So like music, drama, art is all done in order to kind of add to a CV or add to an application. And I think this kind of is, this instrumentalization of creativity is kind of what is ultimately damaging young people in their ability to kind of find value in the work they're doing, because it's not genuinely creative. And I think you're seeing this as well in terms of degrees and the way that people are framing degrees. And I know there are some what people may like nonsense degrees, but like genuine like humanities, like sociology, like history, are all seen as non-productive in kind of an economic sense in a lot of ways. So my question kind of to the panel is, can we really make creativity and productivity compatible, and if so, how?
Yeah, lovely question. Okay, there's a gentleman at the back. I'm trying to see if anyone wave at me if I'm somehow missing you, but no. Okay, I'll take this gentleman at the back. I'm going to throw one more thing in, and then I'll get some closing thoughts in a fashion. But this gentleman.
Before we pack up this session, I'd like to thank Václav Klaus for having the courage to come here, and I'd like to thank him specifically for the stand he took about opposing bad politics and a bad treaty and standing alone. He raised the point about Europe not existing. And then he said, one thing we have in common is the idea of freedom. Actually, we have a means to call, to define Europeans by freedom. It's called the Convention of Human Rights and Fundamental Freedoms. Freedom of expression, freedom of the press, and so on. And the Founding Fathers actually said this is a way to define Europeans, not by geography. So I'd like to ask the panel the following question. When you have 13,000 pages of documents, of regulations, which stop the erection of a wind farm. Is this an expression of freedom? People opposing it? And if it's not, how do we have efficient industry And should we not have entrepreneurs making the laws more than politicians who don't have a practical background?
Okay, thanks. There's some good questions and still some stuff we haven't dealt with, but I kind of want to... We've been a bit pessimistic in this session, and I think in many ways we're right to be. But I still... the first thing that people say if something bad is going on is you stop making it worse. And I think there are lots of relatively straightforward things, or even obvious things we could say that we could do in this, in the various economies of this continent to stop making it worse. And I think even if we did that, standards of living would dramatically change and the trajectory would change. So I'd also like to throw that in when I ask you, as I'm about to sum up. Is there what sort of policy area or set of regulations or ideology, if we just remove that, would actually make a really big difference? But Andreas, if I can ask you for your closing thoughts.
Whether it's a product or a nation or a company in its beginning, you have a small group of people acting out of conviction with a clearly defined purpose. The other thing that is, and that is the soul of Europe, the other thing that is totally necessary in order to expand in any kind of way is access to resources in the form of energy, labor, and materials. And just by saying them, we know that Europe has a really big challenge, but solving the energy part and the material part will be totally fundamental for any kind of growth.
Great, no, that's a good point to end on. Tomasz?
I think the question, gentleman's question about the freedom was crucial and very important. What do we think in Europe about freedom? Because famous Berlin's question, freedom to or freedom from, and I think this is the big difference. I mean, we're in European Union doing a lot to appease people and assure them freedom to the benefits, to the special perks, and to guarantee of work, and very little freedom from. And it also applies to economy, that the way it's structured. If you look at the European market, and we talked about it here about, for example, freedom of services. 2/3 of GDP of European GDP is services, but it's still not covered by the freedom of trade. So this is show how how short we are. If you look at the internal barriers of trade, and it was the World Bank report, it was like if you look at the services, it's like if you put a tariff around 100% on European countries internally. On the goods, it's like 65%. This is why Germans and other countries would rather trade with the US than internally. So the concept of freedom to like a piece of different groups, not just social benefits, but also workers, also different unions, to appease them. This caused the whole concept of economy. And this would have to change. I mean, we'll have to, again, talk about big pictures, talk about what the European Union should be and what freedom we as Europeans really want.
Yeah, you'll always get me on side talking about freedom, so thanks. Ralph, your closing thoughts, or your one area, I know you're an energy guy, but your one area where you think we need to really just get the European Union or get national governments, whatever it is, out.
Well, I'll make two very quick points. One, I think that's very important, is don't forget regulation is the business model. Because when we said before, if you have 13,000 pages of regulation, you know how many lawyers and compliance officers you need to implement those? So you have one institution that creates the regulation, you have another institution that observes and monitors the compliance, and all of them are usually paid by the taxpayer. which we hope do productive things. Very quick, the young lady asked before a wonderful question. I don't think, and we sometimes do this, and I'm very happy you asked this question, we try to split up creativity and productivity. But I believe that those two things are very, very tightly connected, and this was the great experiment, I would say, of during the Cold War in Eastern Europe and Russia, right? Where the argument was, I even actually started in the Habsburg monarchy as well, where you said, okay, we just build functionally, right? So buildings no longer have to be beautiful, they just have to be functional. Like streets don't have to be nice to live in, they just have to be functional. It turned out that this was a drag on the human soul, because we are also an artistic, if you want, species. We like beautiful things. So the person cleaning the street, the person ensuring that it looks nice, tending the garden, is just as important, I would argue, as the hedge fund manager and the doctor. These things kind of, they interact with each other. Now you made another point, that's the last one, and there I think you're also correct. We sent too many people to universities. We are hunting for credentialism, so it's important that you say, I have a diploma, but nobody really asks anymore, what did you learn with this diploma? We should go back to, first of all, teaching people a trade. I think every man should know, I don't know, how to put a nail straight into a wall. I think that's a good thing to do. I think we should have national service. I think that if you're unemployed, there should be some form of mandatory work, not as punishment, but it's good for the soul. People need a reason to get up in the morning. Ideally, then they would do something productive. But we have created a milieu. This is my last, but it's a good example. We've created a milieu where you now have students in Germany, in Austria, and other places in Western Europe, not so much, I believe, in Central and Eastern Europe, where young people say, once I graduate from high school, I'm going to go into welfare. That's their career plan. And I kid you not, that's the idea. We go into welfare. So I think we have to create the right incentive structure. And the good news is, I think this is actually something that would not be too difficult to achieve.
Yeah.
If I may
I'm really sorry, Thomas. I do have to end there, but we're going to carry this on very shortly. But yeah, can we give our panel and our speakers a very warm welcome? Thanks so much. Thank you.
I was just going to tell you a story. We have
one city, one mayor. Moving on to the closing session of the day, and in some ways we've saved the kind of biggest or most difficult topics for last, but also I think one of the most important, because this final session that we've called Tackling the Threat to Western Civilization has come out of a number of discussions that we at MCC Brussels have been engaged in over recent weeks and months and even years. And that's the growing sense that lots of the geopolitical conflicts that capture news headlines, whether that's in Ukraine or in Israel or elsewhere, immediately seem to acquire a lot of argumentation around them that suggests that these are also places where fundamental civilizational values are also on the line. And the rejoinder to that very quickly has often been, well, actually, the fight, as somebody said in one of the earlier sessions, the fight begins at home. Defense begins at home. And if we think that Western civilization is, in some important sense, under threat, well, that we have to first look within ourselves before we start looking elsewhere. And so in this session, we really want to ask this fundamental question. What is the threat to Western civilization? Is it that there's a kind of growth of an increasingly global anti-Western ideology that finds expressions in various different ways? Is it that we've lost faith in ourselves here in Europe or more broadly in the West? Is it that the populations that we've imported through mass migration have become particularly hostile or have been encouraged in some ways to become particularly hostile? Is it all three, or is it something else entirely? So to work our way through these, I'm delighted we're going to have two introductions on this theme, and then I'm going to bring them into conversation with each other. So the first person that we'll hear from is someone who's become a key voice, not just in British and media, very much internationally, on the question of how, if, and why we should support Israel, especially in the current context of rising anti-Semitism and Islamism. She's someone whose work has really become a touch point in these discussions. She broadcasts very widely, she writes voraciously, and is someone that lots of people I know and deeply respect consider absolutely essential reading. So can we please give a very warm welcome to Melanie Phillips.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here this afternoon with so many people who really do get it. It's a great consolation to know that you're all out there fighting the good fight. Ladies and gentlemen, a war against Europe and the West is underway to conquer it for Islam. A war against the Jewish world is underway to exterminate it. These two things are umbilically connected. You can't understand the onslaught against the Jewish world unless you understand how Europe and the West have been attacking themselves for so many decades. You can't understand the attack by the West on itself unless you understand the centrality of Judaism to its existence. In my view, the West will only save itself if it comes to understand that Israel and the Jews are the solution to its own existential predicament. At present, it does not. At present, it behaves as if Israel is the problem and the Jews are expendable. So let me unpick all this for you. The barbaric attack on Israel on October 7, 2023, threw down a challenge to the West. Would it support civilization or barbarism? It has not supported civilization. After October 7, one might have thought the world would have sympathized with Israel's defense against an explicitly genocidal agenda, a seven-front war waged by Iran and its proxies to wipe Israel off the map and kill every Jew. Instead, apparently triggered by the single biggest attack on Jews since the Holocaust, much of the so-called civilized world has turned against Israel and the Jewish people. Anti-Semitism is always with us, but this has been something different. This has been a global attack of unprecedented scale against Israel and the Jewish world, which has been sustained. October the 7th fired a starting gun for what the Islamists believed and still believe is their final victory against first the Jews of Israel and then the Christian West. The demonstrations that started on Western streets while the Israelis were still being slaughtered on October 7 are not protests against Israel, they're not protests for the Palestinian Arabs, they are instead a delirious assertion of Islamic power over Western streets. For the past 2 years, hate mobs have chanted with impunity for the destruction of Israel, the murder of Jews, jihad against the West on the streets of Western cities, while the police have stood by, failing to enforce their own laws against intimidation and incitement. This has reinforced the Islamists' exultant belief that they have cowed the West into submission and this has incentivized ever more open incitement to jihad against the West. What we've lived through for these past 2 years has been a frenzied campaign to demonize and delegitimize Israel with lies. The media has been pumping out Hamas propaganda as credible, even when it is patently ridiculous. I mean, Israel's alleged genocide is, it would seem, the very first genocide in history where the genocidists have provided their victims with hundreds of thousands of tons of food and moved hundreds of thousands of these victims out of harm's way. The statistics produced by the Hamas of the numbers killed during the war, which have failed to identify among these casualties one single combatant and claim that every single death was a civilian killed by Israel, suggests that Gaza is the first society on earth to have totally abolished natural death. This is a truly miraculous achievement. Zionism, the self-determination of the Jewish people in their ancestral homeland, has been redefined as Nazism and Zionists as beyond the pale. Israeli self-defense against genocide has been branded as genocide. Open demonization of the Jews with brazen and ancient tropes of Jews controlling the world in their own interests are now rampant. This deranged obsession has been normalized in our universities, among the professions, across the culture, laundered by the entire global humanitarian and human rights establishment, which has weaponized this by lawfare through the Hamas-sympathizing United Nations and its echo chamber NGOs like Human Rights Watch and Amnesty and the international courts. Amazing, incredible. If you care about the survival of Europe and the West, you'd better believe it. It's a pathological discourse not applied to any other nation, people, or cause on earth. An unholy alliance between Islamists, those forces of Islam who believe in holy war to Islamize the world, and progressives who make common cause with them in their hatred of Israel and Jews and their hatred of the West. The result has been a physical and verbal onslaught on Jews in Britain, in France, in the Netherlands, and in really every Western country where the Islamo-leftist alliance holds cultural power. Now, instead of calling all this out as an unconscionable war against the Jews and upon civilization, Western governments have been fueling it. The United Kingdom, France, and others have parroted the lies about famine, starvation, disproportionate killing by Israel. Governments in Europe, the graveyard of the Jewish people over centuries, have been recycling the genocidal lies of Islamists determined to exterminate the Jewish people and conquer the West. This matters not just because it's an offense against decency and humanity. It matters not just because Israel is crucial to the West's security and military defense. It matters because Israel and the Jewish people are central to the war against the West on a civilizational level. The foundational structure of Western civilization was, of course, Christianity. But Christianity was founded upon Judaism, and it's the Hebrew Bible which has been the source of the West's conscience, the internalization of right and wrong, respect for human life, justice and compassion, moral responsibility and duty to others. Today, these principles have been replaced by ideologies all about putting the individual first. After a decades-long attack on core Western values that are rooted in the Bible. This has destroyed truth and morality. It's replaced truth by power. Objective truth was abolished. Everything is instead relative, a matter of subjective opinion. Feelings and emotion have trumped facts and evidence. If there's no truth, there can be no lies. So lies about Israel are believed as truths, and truths are dismissed as mere opinions of the partisans of a cause deemed illegitimate. Cultural relativism means you can't say the West is better than any other culture. The West was born in the original sins of colonialism and exploitation. The Western nation and its culture are seen as a source of division, prejudice, and war. These have to be replaced by universalism, representing the brotherhood of man. But the West's core values are not universal at all. They are deeply particular, rooted in biblical values. This unprecedented onslaught against the Jews has occurred because the Jews are central to Western civilization, a culture against which the West's educated classes have themselves venomously turned. In other words, October the 7th turbocharged the West's decades-long process of cultural suicide. This vacuum that has been achieved has been exploited by the Islamists. The Islamists understand very well that the Jews are central to the West. As they repeatedly say, first we'll destroy the Jews, then the Christians. And this program is well underway throughout the West, throughout Europe, with only a few exceptions in Eastern Europe. Europe is losing its identity through mass immigration, particularly of Muslims who refuse to integrate and who expect Western cultures to adapt to Islam instead. Many Western Muslims are model Western citizens, but an enormous and unsustainable number are not. The West's reaction is to ignore this and submit to it. It denounces any attempt to call it out as Islamophobia. Why does the West behave like this? First of all, it's fear. The numbers are very large, the threats of violence are explicit and backed by actual terrorism. Second, for decades, the West has told itself that it's racist to think people from the developing world can do anything wrong. The default position of the Western liberal is that people from the developing world are oppressed by the West. They are therefore victims. Because they are victims, they can do no wrong, while the West, being their victimizers, can do nothing right. And Israel is considered one of the victimizers. Under this ideology, Jews can never be victims because they are said to control everything. They control finance, they control the law, they control the media, they control industry. This, of course, is paranoid anti-Semitism. So at its core, the default position of the Western liberal is deeply anti-Jew. Ignoring the threat to itself, the West therefore blames Israel for defending itself against that same threat. We've all gone through the looking glass. Islamists understand the West far better than the West understands itself. Islamists understand that religion is the moral scaffolding of a culture. Without it, that culture collapses. Now, the key bridgehead in this has been support for the Palestinian cause, the default position for every Western progressive and which is treated as their badge of conscience. Palestine cause is the destruction of Israel. Look at their maps, their emblems. Palestine is the whole of Israel. That's what they want. Listen to what they teach their children, to hate and murder Jews, not Israelis, Jews. Observe their Nazi-style demonization of Jews as rats or snakes or octopuses, monstrous demonic figures said to be secretly controlling the world in their own interests. This is why many Jews in Britain and the rest view the forest of Palestine flags on their street as a forest of Nazi flags. The Palestine cause, in my view, has corrupted Western discourse and thinking. Those who've embraced this cause parrot the very same blood libels about Israel, the same visceral disgust of Jews, the same poisonous fantasies, the same recycling of the ancient stereotypes of Jewish supremacy, the chosen people, the blood libels, and the West calls this conscience. This is the same inverted thinking that accuses the Israeli Jewish victims of genocidal assault of being the genocidal aggressors, and it claims that the Islamists' agenda to conquer the West is a defense against Islamophobia. Palestinianism is the Trojan horse for anti-Semitism, and anti-Semitism is the Trojan horse for the attack on Western civilization. Anti-Semitism isn't about the Jews. It says nothing about the Jews. What it says is that those who hold these views are degenerate, dehumanizing barbarians. A society of degenerate, dehumanizing barbarians will not survive and doesn't deserve to do so. So what's to be done? Plenty is to be done. We must all speak out against these lies. We must reassert, celebrate, promote, and defend the core values of the Western nation rooted in the West's historic tradition and institutions. We must turn the universities back into the crucibles of reason rather than what they've become, which is engines for the destruction of reason. We must restore education as the transmission of Western culture, prioritize the married family, defend the nation's borders, face down Islamization, reassert the core value of one law for all, curb immigration, deport Islamic extremists, and ban Sharia law, which recognizes no superior secular authority and is therefore fundamentally an assault on Western liberal democracy. Israel's message to the West is that the Western nation state is not, as is often said, the route to nationalism and fascism. The Western nation state is essential to defend freedom, democracy, and the core values of European and Western society. The message that Israel has to the West is this, that a culture that understands and values what it is will live, while a culture that despises itself and wants to erase its particular and historic identity will die. Israel's message to the West, and it could not be more important at this moment in history, is that in order to survive, a culture has to choose life. This is a lesson that Europe and the West, I'm afraid, have yet to learn. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Melanie promised me there would be a barnstorming and forthright speech, and she's certainly delivered. So there'll be lots for us to get into when we come to some questions. But now to hear from our other speaker is someone who, another one of these very few people who I mentioned with regards earlier to one of our early speakers, very small number of people who almost make you think that the European Parliament is a worthwhile institution. He must be one of the busiest people in the Parliament because he serves on a number of committees that every time I look at I think is probably not feasible, and has a background in law. But more than anything else, and the reason why I'm so delighted that he's with us, is when he spoke for us at another conference some other time ago, he was one of the first people that I met in Brussels who's definitely can be described as a conservative, definitely a patriot and a populist, but someone who said, if we want to save conservatism, we've got to not be very conservative. We've got to be very radical. He's someone who I think really gets it on an intellectual level about some of the work we're trying to do at MCC Brussels. So can we please give a very warm welcome to Jorge Villalba Buxede.
Many thanks to the MCC for the invitation. Once again, my lack of English skills is being publicly tested. And I am making, once again, the mistake of putting myself to the test. Sorry. Europe is going through a deep cultural, social, political, and security crisis linked to mass migration, political Islam, and the weakness of European institutions. For centuries, my country, Spain, was a frontier between Christianity and Islam. Spain fought for 8 centuries, 800 years against Islamic rule to recover its unity and defend the Catholic faith. Today we face another turning point, but this time without visible borders and armies. Many of you remember when French journalist Anne Sinclair interviewed King of Morocco, Hassan II. Speaking about Muslim immigrants in Europe, he said, they will never be 100% French. I can assure you of that. He was not lying. It was a political declaration. And what happens in Spain is also happening in all Europe. In 1992, less than 5,000, or 50,000, sorry, Muslims were officially registered in Spain. In 2023, Muslim residents are more than 2 million. In 30 years. Mass immigration increases the proportion of the Muslim population, making integration more difficult. Uncontrolled immigration produces serious security risks, including jihadism and terrorism. Cities only in Spain, such as Ceuta, Melilla, Barcelona, Tarragona, Valencia, Almería, contain now districts where Islamic cultural identity dominates. Language, clothing, food, social relations, trade reproduce the models of the countries of origin. Parallel societies. If you import Morocco, you will obtain Rabat. If you import Pakistan, you will obtain Islamabad. These parallel communities suffer from high unemployment, misuse of social benefits by those who refuse to learn local and national languages, and increasing crime and hidden radicalism. Islamization is growing behind a veil of fear and silence. We should remember every day the Rotterdam case. We cannot forget one of the greatest scandals of modern Europe. 1,400 girls raped and abused over 15 years by gangs from the Pakistani Muslim community. Authorities ignored the crimes because they feared being accused of racism. This case demonstrated how political correctness can destroy a society's ability to defend its own people. Education has become a key battlefield. Teachers face pressure from families who demand Islamic content. Students request special menus, and social pressure prevents any criticism of Islam without fear of retaliation. The border between Dar al-Islam and Christian Europe has disappeared. In the last 35 years, Europe has changed. Streets, neighborhoods, schools, hospitals, universities, and leisure spaces look different. The Islamo left calls this coexistence. The center-right call it multiculturalism. Many of us call it an invasion. Nobody can now deny that Muslim leaders are executing a deliberate strategy to Islamize Europe. The objective is not coexistence. The new Islamism doesn't use bombs. The new Islamism buys influence, finances mosques, creates NGOs, and presents itself as a moderate partner. Today, we have known that European money through NGOs is going to Hamas. This is the reality. We are paying the war against us. But the objective remains the same for the political Islam: to isolate Muslim communities, to create a parallel counter-culture, and to advance Islamization from inside, a real Trojan horse. The soft forms of political Islam are more difficult to confront than the violent ones. They operate legally under democratic rules and receive funding from European governments, European institutions, that they believe that they are preventing radicalization. Few voices there to say that political Islam is not compatible with Western civilization. In Spain, Vox continues to repeat that every day. Dozens of local councils in Spain have used public money to finance Islamist organizations under the pretext of fighting Islamophobia. Meanwhile, funds reach Syria or Hamas, and doctrines against equality, freedom of conscience, or freedom of expression are promoted in mosques. Financing those who want to destroy Europe, to destroy you, is suicidal. But Europe, governed by elites without soul, without spirit, without principles, seems ready to pay for its own surrender. For decades, Europe's political, media, intellectual elites have preferred not to see, not to speak, and not to think. Any attempt to denounce the Islamization of Europe is neutralized with an arsenal of labels: Islamophobic, racist, xenophobic, fascist, far-right. The only way to win is not to fear these labels. When young Algerians or Moroccans transform a victory, a football victory, into violent riots in our streets, and the media call it festive celebrations, we prepare our own defeat. When a girl in Alicante is raped by several young men from the Maghreb, and the media hide their nationality and origin and their religion, we prepare our own defeat. Debates are censored, dissent is punished. This parallel world exists in the suburbs, in the banlieue of Paris, in Malmo, in Brussels, in Spain, in Barcelona, in Madrid, in some districts. Jihadists hide in these neighborhoods. Drugs are trafficked. Police enter only with reinforcements. Arabic signs compete with local ones, and where the full veil is increasingly common. European cities are full of areas where the state has withdrawn, no-go areas where a parallel legal order has emerged, the law of the mosques. The demographic growth of Islam in Europe comes mainly from a continuous flow of immigrants, not from high birth rates. Since second and third generation Muslim families in Europe tend to have the same number of children as non-Muslims. We have to stop mass migration. Political Islam needs, I don't know where I read this idea. Political Islam needs three elements, three things: time, money, and silence. Time to grow, to arrive and grow. Money to organize, and silence to advance. Our empty and neutral democracies offers all three things to these people. But it is not too late. There is still time to defend who we are, to defend our heritage. Identity exists only if it is defended. We must remember who we were, who we are, and who we want to remain. Europe has the right to protect its identity. Europe has the right to demand integration and submission, they to us. We do not have the right to surrender Europe. We must end public support for political Islam, whether moderate or radical. We must re-immigrate immigrants who refuse to integrate in Europe or who live permanently on social benefits. We must stop extraordinary regularizations processes and automatic family reunification. And we must confront the violence of radical Islam with all the legitimate force of the state. Let us wake up every day proud to be Spanish, Italian, French, English, German, Polish, Hungarian. Proud to be European, proud to be Christians. Proud of our history, our traditions, our laws, our faith. And let us go to sleep every night knowing that we have not retreated, not even an inch. Thank you very much. Sorry for my English. Long life Europe. Long life Christianity.
Thank you very much, Ahoy. And you should be banned from joking about your English when you deliver such eloquent speeches. But wonderful. Melanie, I wanted to give you an opportunity, obviously, to reflect, if you like, on what Jorge has been saying, but also just to push you and to ask you to clarify just a little bit when you somewhat provocatively but very convincingly say that the if you like, the Jewish question is the central question now in the defense of Western civilization. And I wonder how you square that with the degree to which I sometimes describe a third worldism, where there's a mix of various anti-Western, anti-Western civilization forces. But Islam and the hatred of Jews is kind of one component of that, because we see other things in the mix. And so I just want to push you a little bit on how we square some of those other anti-civilizational tendencies that aren't directly related to, say, anti-Semitism, hatred of the Jews, attempt to undermine the foundation of Christianity, as you put it in the Jewish Bible.
Well, it is, as you suggest.
Just keep speaking, and hopefully they'll get it.
As you suggest, it is a much broader issue. that we're all facing, a much broader set of challenges that we're all facing. But as I try to explain in my remarks, I see the Palestinian issue as the bridgehead between Islam and those parts of the Western populations which will, in the Islamists' view, advance their agenda. And that's because the Palestinian cause, as I've said, signs up very large numbers of certainly progressives in the West, people on the sort of liberal side of politics in the West, to a discourse which is, they think, I'm sure in many of their minds, they think that they are supporting, the oppressed Palestinian Arabs. But in fact, what they're doing is promoting a cause which sees the destruction of Israel as the principal immediate aim, and behind that comes the destruction of the West. So this is the sort of that bridgehead. And what they're playing on, the Islamists, who go far beyond the Palestinians. I mean, this is going back, to the foundations of modern political Islam in the earlier parts of the 20th century. They perceive that the West is absolutely vulnerable. They perceive that Europe, and I think Britain has been an absolutely key player in this. They perceive that Britain is the outlier in terms of post-morality, post-biblical, post-truth, everything, post-West, everything. And they perceive that this has created a vacuum caused by the way in which the West has turned on itself in terms of, it's what its elites have told itself, have told themselves, that the West was born in the original sins of colonialism and imperialism and whiteness and all that sort of stuff, and that the very idea of the Western nation state is something that creates division and war and terrible things and has to be replaced by universalism. The Islamists understand that if you actually erode, undermine, and get rid of the religious basis of a society, it's over. It will not anymore have any principles that are solid. It will not defend itself, and it's open for invasion, both physical and spiritual, moral invasion. And so, the Israel thing is the bridgehead, and we can see this because all the things that we've been talking about in terms of what the West has done to itself have gone on for decades. And the anti-Israel stuff and the anti-Semitism has also gone on for decades. It's been building and building in the universities, which have then spread out through everybody who's educated in the university, spread out through the culture. But this thing really got critical mass on October the 7th, 2023. That was an absolute step change. That's when we had the arrival of Gaza-first politics in the West. That wasn't happening before. So I do see all this as one story. The underlying story is what the West's done to itself and the way it's created this kind of vacuum, left itself defenseless, into which has marched the Islamic world, or those elements in the Islamic world that want to Islamize the West, and their bridgehead has been Israel and the Palestinian cause.
All right, I wanted to give you an opportunity to reflect also on what you have heard from Melanie, especially what Melanie puts as the central role that anti-Israel, anti-Semitic kind of activism plays in this threat to Western civilization.
I am substantially agree with her, because we see the question from Spain. And we understand clearly the situation in Israel. For the political Islam, they have two main targets. The first target is Israel, for us, the Holy Land. It's clear, Jerusalem and all his. And the second target is Al-Andalus. In all the documents of Al-Qaeda, they speak about to retake Granada, Cordoba, and this is part of my country. And I understand clearly. For me, it's clear, if Israel is defeated, the next step is Spain. It's not Europe, it's Spain. For me, I understand the question in that way. And it's clear for us. And it's very important not to confund. I am Catholic. I believe that Jesus Christ is Son of God. You're not? Okay. I do not confund this situation, because I know in this battle you are in my side, or I am in your side. We have the same enemy. They want to destroy us. They want to destroy your country, your religion, my country, my religion. And it is very important to understand. It's not about religion. It's about our civilization. It's another thing. It's a super thing. And in Spain, we, the right part of our country, understand, because we have the worst left in Europe. And the worst government in Europe. Pedro Sánchez is the best friend of Hamas. He's the best friend of all the narco-dictaduras in America. No? This is our government. We have to defeat them. Yeah.
We used to compete as Europeans for who had the best government. And we often now have arguments amongst ourselves as to who has the worst one. But Melanie, just drawing and continuing this thought from Jorge, which I know you'll want to reflect on, is that I think there's, we'll know this, especially in American politics at the moment, there's a kind of bubbling up of discontent with the demand that some people feel for an unconditional support of Israel. And lots of people, especially in America, but I think people in Europe are beginning to feel, if not fed up with the constant demand to support Israel as they see it, but the way that in recent years or decades it's been pitched as something like a religious duty to do. And I think the thought that the two of you are developing together is that we should begin to be able to make the appeal in terms of self-interest as well. As whatever there is a civilizational crisis, there might be a religious crisis, but there's also, we have a kind of direct self-interest, do we, in linking some of these threats together?
Absolutely. There's a self-interest for the reasons that I've said, and there is, conversely, it's very self-destructive on the part of Europe and the West to have unconditional hatred of Israel. I mean, no one, as far as I've never heard anybody in the Israel-supporting side of life to say there should be unconditional support of Israel. All that's ever been required is that Israel is treated like any other country, but it's not. It is singled out for a campaign which is afforded to, or treatment which is afforded to no other country, people, or cause on earth. Now you have to, you have to wonder what's going on here. It's clearly, of immense importance to the people who are singling it out. This has, I think, distorted everything. But I want to pick up something which Jorge said earlier, which I think is very, sparks an interesting set of thoughts, because you were talking about the fact that Western leaders won't confront Islamization. And you were suggesting that fear is a very large part of that. And I absolutely agree. But there is something else which is, I think, intrinsic in the denial of Islamization. It is quite comical in a way, because in Britain, the best and the brightest in government circles and security circles go to extreme lengths to say that Islamic terrorism has got nothing to do with Islam. I mean, it's like, what is it, environmentalism, perhaps? And the reason that they give is entirely spurious. There was one very highly placed individual I spoke to many years ago, and I said, do you think well, what do you think is the cause of Islamic terrorism? And he said, well, it's nothing to do with Islam. And I said, well, that's curious. I'm sure it's everything to do with Islam. And he said, no, you can't say that, because if you say it's got anything to do with Islam, if it comes out of Islam, then you are condemning every single Muslim. Well, that is, to put it mildly, a non sequitur. There are plenty of Muslims who don't have anything to do with this extremism. That doesn't mean that it's not. So it seems to me that this denial is based on something else. It is the inability of the post-biblical secular West to understand religion at all. So this is why, for example, in Britain, when we had terrible suicide bombings, people said, What causes somebody to blow themselves up? It must be despair. They didn't understand. They're ecstatic. It's an ecstasy.
Yes.
They are fulfilling their life's ambition.
I agree. They won the first battle, is the battle of the language. When they explain, Islam is peace. No, Islam is submission. The big victory for them is that. They have convinced that the rest of the people that is not putting bombs. It's a good Islamist or good Muslim. No, it's the whole civilization. It's the whole comprehension of the Weltanschauung in German. No, this is the whole idea of these people. It's confronting with our way of life, way of thinking, way of everything. And I agree with you that I think it's 1970s, the last century. It was a big change in the world because the de-Christianization of our continent was accelerated after the Vatican Concilium. And in UK, I do not know very well the situation, but you are Protestant, is different. And in the same way, it occurs re-Islamization in the whole world, the Muslim world. The Muslim Brotherhoods, it changed the Shah for the Iran, the Shias, and it's a revolution inside the world of Islam. There are two movements, parallels, the de-Christianization in Europe, re-Islamization in Islam. And this is what we are now. Is the worst moment in now, and you are suffering the consequences in Israel.
Yeah, just to conclude, because we'll have to stop very shortly, but I just wanted a sense from the two of you as to where the battle needs to be fought. And let me give you a very quick example. I was reading an account of someone at a university, and they have a prayer room, right? They have a prayer room, they call it in English a multi-faith prayer room. So in theory, anybody can go there and pray. And they have materials for Muslims, materials for Christians, materials for Jews to do their prayers in. And inevitably, what happened was that very quickly, there was no Bibles left in the prayer room. And the Muslim symbols were stuck up and placed in contravention of the rules that were supposed to govern this prayer room. And the Christians who went to pray in this room felt scared. They're no longer going to pray in the room. There would occasionally be threatening-looking Muslim guys standing outside the room. They were sex segregating the room, all of these things. And on one level, the response to that is, this might be an issue for the police, right? There's a threat, there's some kind of threatening going on. But I also think that where were the burly-looking Christian guys? Where were the muscular Jewish guys who were going to make it clear that they weren't going to take this treatment? And what I'm trying to get at is that we can say that there is an external problem, which there is, but there's also a lack of willingness among so many of us to be able to face up to these things. So I'd just like you to reflect on that just to close, if you would.
Well, I think that's absolutely right. At every level, the West, or Europe, has run away at individual levels, at university level, at prayer room level. At every level, there are people in charge who need to uphold rules, and governments need to uphold laws, basic rules and basic laws that govern the society or the institution or whatever it is. They need to uphold them, and it can be difficult, and they're going to have to face down extremist, dogmatic people. But if you don't do that, then it's over. I think you can push this back. I think that Islamists, like so many, just bullies, they achieve what they achieve if there's no resistance. If there is resistance, they are pushed back. The problem is that the West is not resisting for all kinds of reasons that we've been talking about. And that's what, if that were to happen at every level, I think that would make a tremendous difference.
Yeah. Absolutely. History shows that the civilizations do not fail only because of the external threat. It's most important the internal weakness. I was 1 year ago in Israel, in the Golan Heights. I saw 20 men and women, 20 years old, with a weapon. They are defending their territory, they are defending their life. Until our young people, our youth, do not understand that they are defending their lives, their family, their country, their traditions, their religion, we will be in this situation. But in any moment, I don't know when, there will be a moment that our young people will stand and resist and will win.
Great. Can we give a big thanks to Jorge and Melanie for a wonderful closing? Thank you. Jorge, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Melanie.
We good on?
Yeah, please. Just watch the step.
Yep. Careful. Watch your step.
So that will bring us to the end of what's been a really exciting and packed first day of this battle for the soul of Europe. I think, I don't know if Václav Klaus is still here, but that last session, I think, got some way towards making a case for what we're trying to articulate with the idea that there's a battle on for the soul of Europe. And we don't mean that there's a battle on for just one particular thing that we have to all agree on, but rather there's a broad civilizational question that we have to get to grips with. You may or may not agree with everything that either of the two panelists just said. You might agree with one of them, or you might agree with neither of them. But I think it's clear to a lot of us that the sense of malaise, the sense of spiritual, if you like, and intellectual rot in the heart of Western societies has become really quite profound. And unless we're prepared to not just stand up and fight for the things that we believe, but also have very good answers to some of these questions, like questions about the economy, like questions about how to respond to the overweening powers of the European and EU bureaucracies, but also a whole range of questions which we're also going to touch on in more detail tomorrow, like freedom of speech, like migration, and other really important topics. So I hope you agree that today's been a start, so the start of something. We've fired the starting shot of this battle that we'd like to wage for the soul of Europe. I'd like to thank all of you who've come with us on this little journey, on this experiment. Thank you very much for being here with us. I've enjoyed all of your comments and questions, and I hope that it's been interesting for you and maybe inspiring for you in the way that I've got a lot out of the discussions today. Tomorrow we'll be able to welcome you back for another day of discussion, but also at the end we'll be having an after-conference party, a drinks reception for you all. Unfortunately, we're not able to offer you a glass of wine or a beer today, so we have to say goodbye to most of you. For those of you with, who are speakers or VIPs, there'll be a small reception upstairs followed by dinner, so if you have a lanyard and you're not press, please stick around for that. But for the rest of you, it's been a wonderful day of debate and discussion. I'd like to thank you all very much, and we really look forward to seeing many of you back here tomorrow. Thank you very much.